Welcome everybody to the General Husbandry 26 series of lectures, and we are really fortunate this evening. We've got Jack Silberrad from, he was the regional bee inspector for the Western region, but the Eastern region might just be about to get lucky. We've invited Jack, but not just because we're keen to get the latest advice from our bee inspectors, but because we had him do some bee health days in Warwickshire. We were very lucky, we got two, and they were really excellent. So in the spirit of sharing the love, we want to welcome Jack to the BBK General Husbandry series of lectures. And Jack is not only regional bee inspector, but a third generation beekeeper.
I skip
And
more, but yeah, it's it.
and so, Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. We'll get right to it with the screen share, and I would just direct your attention to the clock. It's 7 o'clock now. We all have lives to get back to, but I really appreciate your time this evening. And this is going to be a fairly large presentation. There is an awful lot of content to go over. However, what we will do is move at speed, keep it interesting, keep it light, and because this is being recorded, if there's anything that you are really interested in, then we can come back and address that later. You can email me, you can speak to me, and you can come back to the presentation itself. Just want to see how much of my screen I can actually capture back from. Can I hide this? Anyone? It just disappears. Wonderful. Getting husbandry ready, hygiene, disease, pests, and poisoning, four massive and very important topics within beekeeping. So today's exciting agenda, I'll give you a brief breakdown for those who haven't met me before, where I'm from, who I am, why am I here bothering you good people. We'll have a quick look at the working quirks of the National Bee Unit. That's the civil service, taxpayer-funded service for bee health, and today's speaking lecture. And then a little bit about the beekeeping landscape through the 2020s into what is now the new year of 2026. Before we really get into the meat of today's talk, that being foul broods, European and American, the biology, the recognition, the treatment, some of the gruesome details, before we then move into yet more wonderfully depressing detail for Varroa, the viruses it carries, the minor disorders or non-notifiable diseases that you will encounter in the hive, effective treatments for those diseases and Varroa, and its management. We will then a little bit of pests, both and mundane. Throughout, we'll be talking about prevention, treatment, hygiene, sampling methods, and there will also be an offer I hope you won't refuse, but you've got to stick around for that. Before we finish up with some closing remarks and some questions. So, how will you benefit this? I hope to give you some new knowledge. Is it going to be exhaustive? Almost definitely not. I could talk for hours just about foulbrood. So we're going to do a tour de force. We're going to touch on the syllabus. We're going to give you lots of touch points, launching points, if you like, to go and do further reading. And of course, you can always circle back a time. Ultimately, I have confidence to keep happy, healthy, be your questions hopefully at the end. To leave you with an outlook more positive than a Cambridge. What I'm not going to do is name and shame, dictate to you a rigid structure that bees must be kept a certain way. We're all doing different things for different reasons, and I'm certainly not going to blame you or other people for differences in opinion. But before we can really get started, I'm hoping this is going to pop up in the chat. Let's play British Beekeeping Association bingo. So this is today's syllabus. This is what we're going to be talking about. And if you've got a copy of the PDF or the Word document that's going to go around from Diane, then hopefully maybe afterwards you can tick off the things that you've covered. And if there's anything missing, and if you still can't find it, come and moan at me, but it really ought to be in there somewhere. So where am I from? Cheese, disease, and bees. So Roger Silberrad, my grandfather worked for the British Development Agency out in Zambia. Nigeria. He spoke and wrote articles for Apamondia and beekeeping magazines here in the UK. But the man died when I was just 4 years old. During his time in Zambia, he was visited and spoke to a gentleman, bottom left of your screen, David Wainwright, very, very successful bee farmer out in Wales, Mr. Zambia himself, fantastic bee farmer. And in the 90s, he took on an apprentice, Steve Benbow. He founded his own company, London Honey Company, in 19. year or 4-year apprentice in bee farm. So although I didn't know my grandfather, hopefully you can see through his writing and through this sort of almost cycle, I've come to know him and the craft that is beekeeping. So fantastic time during my apprenticeship. Loved all the gory, gooey stuff, pulling bees apart, dissecting them from mouth through to anus. Got my excellence in bee farming, shed a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears during the process. And now, of course, continue to run my own bees in and around Cambridge, Suffolk, bee removals, working with researchers and charities, and generally having a fantastic time within and without the National Bee Unit. Of course, it's all about for me at least, other products and services of the hive, but I love honey and beekeeping. Of course, I've come to become really entrenched within the National Bee Unit, working to eradicate hornets across Kent and the south of England. And as you've just heard, managing a team now in the east of England as opposed to travelling all the way to the west. I also look after the DASH scheme for bee farmers. That's a high level disease education scheme. But what about the bee unit itself? Well, it comes about in the 1940s. There was this thing called the Second World War that you might have heard about going on. Food security was really, really important. We were importing most of our food across the Atlantic, and the torpedoes. So in 1942, we got our first bit of legislation. We get our experts for foulbrood control. At that time, American foulbrood was significantly more common um, than we would say see it today. Skep beekeeping, there are about 25,000 skep hives in the UK, so a very, very different beekeeping landscape to today. Incidentally, during the war, there was an extra ration of green dyed sugar that you could use as a beekeeper. And would you know it, there was a time. So fast forward a bit, we get the Bees Act 1980, the Diseases and Pest Control Order. And this is what gives us as bee inspectors our power of entry. We can go in to places that a policeman without a warrant couldn't go on the suspicion that there's beekeeping equipment or beekeeping going on there. Hopefully, we're a globally respected service, and we look after what is now a 3,000 Ferrari annually, worth 3,000 Ferraris annually, I should say, in terms of pollination services. And we're still free. We're still a taxpayer-funded service. Now, where would I be without my bits of paper and legislation? My personal favourite comes from the Bees Act. Asked on boats. Well, I've done beekeeping on boats on the Thames and the London. I've been to airfields to take swarms from airplanes, vehicles, trucks, which very, very specifically mentioned in the legislation. So if keeping bees, I'll get in touch with, I'd love to cut them. So our work then, there's about 60 of us across England and Wales. Scotland has its own team. Northern Ireland has its own anybody at the moment, unfortunately, as of January 2026. And our main role is through education, inspection for the health of honeybees, search and destroy of exotic pests and notifiable diseases, and of course, to give you that free MOT for your bees. That's how I would put it. We're friendly experts. We're there to help you. We're there to make sure things are healthy and happy and help you get there. A bit like a GP or going to see a GP, it can be a bit unnerving getting a kit off, getting inside your hive, but trust me, we really have seen it all. And you can see here the ancient comb on top of this hive. I'd say my colleagues and I, we take a consultative approach. Know our rather eccentric beekeeping friends, and indeed, that is a nucleus colony on a telescopic stand inside a van. You see rather depressing things like this. So this is an upcycled set of kitchen cabinets. Cambridgeshire. The beekeeper was feeding his bees. You can see it's a bit of a mess. In fact, he's feeding behind a supermarket. Not great for biosecurity. The one silver lining being that as supermarket honey, probably 50 pence a jar, it's probably in the first place. So we look after various regions across England and Wales. I moved from the west to the east, and you can see there's a big challenge ahead of us, which is why it's such a good opportunity to and educate up and coming beekeepers as yourself. There's no shortage of beekeepers. This is our traffic light system. The red apiaries being the highest apiaries with disease or a history of disease or near disease would be lower, less, more distant from disease or a more historic case of disease. And green, you're out in the countryside, you'll probably never see us. So that's just in and around Cambridge. So the beekeeping landscape, and I'd love for this border at the top to naff off. Hopefully it will disappear. Um, Beekeeping landscape in the 2020s. Of course, there are more beekeepers. What a great time to be a beekeeper, but this means there's a greater burden on beekeepers, inspectors, the economy to manage disease. Service are a perennial problem. We also have an increasing number, not just of beekeepers, but also of the colonies that we're keeping. Who made splits this year or this last year? Who caught swarms? Who made an increase? If you stayed the same and didn't increase, is that because you united colonies? Or did we distribute colonies? Did we give them to our friends and our associations? So bees are also moving around. And of course, we've got this high demand for quality honey with a postcode. Of course, the problems arise from that increase in beekeeping. But again, this is a fantastic time to upskill beekeepers, deal with them when we encounter them. And really, I think, particularly today, there are new philosophies, new ways of thinking, lots of different opinions about how we want to keep our bees healthy. Well, there are phrases like save the bees, natural beekeeping. And I'm not going to poop, I'm going to say, there are honeybees on the planet than have ever been ever in the history of honeybees and the pollinators, solitary bees, flies, worms, beetles. Those are the pollinators that really need our help. What about natural beekeeping? Well, it's in a box at ground level, artificially high concentration of hives and bees within those hives. So I'm not sure if these are useful terms, but whatever you do, be rigorous and have your bees' welfare in mind when you do it. So, without further ado, the meat of today's presentation. What is European foulbrood? Foulbrood is this and potentially lethal infection of the developing larvae within a beehive. Bacteria Melissococcus plutoneus is thick, you can't see it with the naked eye, and although we call it European foulbrood, historically it has a global distribution. There are country-specific strain types or flavors of EFB, but this isn't something that has, begun in Europe and stayed in Europe. It's global. It's historically ancient and has co-evolved with honeybees. One of the most difficult parts about managing it as a disease, and I should say the UK, Britain is quite special really, that manages European foul brood as a notifiable disease controlled by law. One of the hardest things to manage about it is this long symptomless phase. The infection can be there, it can spread through an apron, it can spread through an operation before symptoms emerge later. Normally because of stress, and you can see some things listed there, which means by the time you notice it, it's often too late. This stained microscopic slide then shows you the bacterial cells. They're the little round ones, the bacilli, the grapes, if you like, as opposed to the sausage, not bacilli, cocci. So a real snowstorm, and that comes from the gut of a developing larvae. Before we talk about the symptoms and what we actually see, it's really, really important to understand what healthy looks like. And as our budding and growing beekeepers, of course, you're going to sit with an audience who can talk back to me, but you're going to sit there now and you're going to nod and say, yep, Jan, I can see they're segmented, they're lying comfortably in the bottom of the cell, and they're pearly white, almost good enough to eat. Beautiful bit of open brood. So when we think about the symptoms of European foul brood, take the E of European as B for capping. B for capping. So it's open brood. Open brood we want to be looking at. And of course, if you remember nothing else from today, just know what healthy looks like. Be really confident you can identify healthy, because if it starts going off the rails, you'll be in a position to interrogate it and figure out what's going on. So what might you see? What might trigger you to look a bit closer? Well, an uneven brood pattern, bit of pepper potting, mixed ages of brood. Remember, the queen normally moves in a concentric circular pattern. She's laying in patch. Shouldn't really see drastically different aged brood in different parts of the brood patch. It's fairly segmented. So as that infection takes hold in the gut of the larvae, it will have been introduced by a nurse bee that's been cleaning cells and become contaminated. So it's a fecal oral transmission route, begins to develop in the gut, and it begins to compete with the larvae for food. The larvae itself will twist, it will contort, and as it dies later, it will lose its segmentation. You may see the gut turn a creamy white mayonnaise kind of consistency. That's your gold standard before that dead, decomposing larvae then begins to sort of melt down, begins to yellow, go brown, and notice an unpleasant smell. That's not the smell of EFB, that's the smell of decomposition of fatty acids. And later, you'll read in the literature, very rarely encountered in the field, if those dead larvae can dry out, they produce a rubbery scale, a scale inside the cell that you can remove relatively easily. But I would really focus on that white gut. And in practice, this is what it looks like. You've taken your larvae out, you're dissecting it on the hive tool. You can see the white sausage there, the lumen of the gut, absolutely rammed full of bacteria. That's your gold standard. If you see a white gut, 99% of the time, that's going to be EFB. So, prospective inspectors in the room, your room, have a look at the slide in front of you. Just take a moment and think, is there anything in here that you would want to look at? Certainly, the brood pattern is very, very disrupted. You can see there's capped brood next to open brood, next to eggs, next to very young larvae. Why is that? The answer is death in this case. There could be a nectar flow or pollen or other reasons why the queen can't lay in a particular cell, but here we can see quite clearly stuff is dying and being relayed. And this is where we're getting the disrupted pattern. And sure enough, you can see lying across the mouth of the cell, twisted around, there are many, many larvae within that slide going wrong. Looking a bit closer, you can see there the gut is actually lying towards the mouth of the cell. It's not C-shaped in the bottom. And you can even see, if you're very sharp-eyed, just the beginning of that white gut before we pull it out. So a better looking brood pattern, it's much less disordered. And I should state actually now, there is something crucial missing from this slide. You could say stores, you could say pollen, but what I'm really keen to see is from the frame, if you can have any hope of noticing these cells. It could be as little as just one cell. I've diagnosed plenty of colonies on one cell. So looking, seeing those twisted larvae, they're turning towards the top of the cell, they're having a great time. So later on, we start to get them melting down. We start to get things getting a bit smelly, going mustard colored, really going off the rails. If you're going to look for EFB gut, that white gut, you may well be able to find it in these melted down larvae, but it's easier to find in larvae that haven't begun to decompose. So some hot facts for you then. Melissococcus plutonius is really hardy. It's going to stick around on your comb for 3 years. That's your wet super comb, that's your brood comb, that's the inside of the brood box that you got from your dad's uncle's mother's brother's sister's friend's mate who lost a hive, stopped beekeeping and gave up his kit. And it can survive in honey for 18 months, really hostile, and yet it will live in there for 18 months. That's the spinner, the kid at home, anything that's not been cleaned down. As I said, it's co-evolved with honeybees. It's not a European problem, it's a global problem. In fact, it relates to the lab that characterized the bacteria that causes the disease, and the progression is dependent on strain type. So if you come to Cambridge, come to East Anglia, strain 39, it's really sneaky. It's a slow burner. Goes other parts of the country and it will rip through a colony muckly. Not larvae that's infected will die. Some will survive to adulthood, and of course, at day 8, they defecate, they the nurse bee cleaning that cell will then pick up and transfer to subsequent larvae. So absence versus evidence, really, really crucial point that I don't have a slide for just this moment. But because of this long asymptomatic period before stress sees those symptoms emerge, it can spread. So even if you're not seeing a problem, by having good barrier management, good hygienic practices, if there is an unseen problem, you will already be mitigating it. Because a lack of symptoms doesn't necessarily mean an absence of VFB. Remember that globe. Around the country, we've got these different flavors. You can see year on year, their general locations change, biased by where the bee inspectorate has been. We will pick up by inspection, and the vast majority of cases are picked up by inspection. We do get call outs, but anywhere you see gaps is not necessarily an area that's EFB free. And if you come to Cambridge, people will wax lyrical about EFB free areas because they haven't had any alerts from outside. Well, that's because of me. There aren't many colleagues, and we have to go where we think we're going to find it. And again, you can see it moving around across the nation. Evidence, or rather absence of evidence, is not evidence of absence. So American foulbrood, then, the second of our notifiable diseases of bees to be found here in Britain. It's a highly persistent and contagious disease. Again, it's a bacterial infection by Bacillus larvae, and instead of affecting the open brood, it affects your capped brood. It's a much, much more pathogenic infection, much more likely to kill a colony, and instead phase, it will strike hard, and kill colonies. So its eradication is really reliant on rigorous treatment, destroying the combs, getting rid of the honey, things down. And in some respects, it is easier to deal with than European foul brood because it's very obvious where it is once an infection starts, very quick to pick up. But once again, if we remember nothing else from today's presentation, let's have a quick think about what brood looks like. So this is from day 8 onwards. The larvae is now beginning to pupate. It's got that wax lid over the cocoon that it's spun inside of the cell. And what does a healthy capping look like, I ask? And of course, you'll tell me that it's going to be biscuit coloured, slightly concave. There aren't going to be perforations unless maybe a bee is hatching or the cell is being capped over. And if that is the case, a capping process is going to result in a smooth round hole. You're not going to see jagged edges, and they're going to look relatively dry. You're not going to see, sort of drippy, slimy stuff going on. Of course, here you can see there is something going on in this brood pattern. There is a nice line across this frame, and that would be the wire set within the foundation of this frame from one of my colonies several years ago now. But a really nice example of a disrupted brood pattern that actually doesn't have anything nasty going on in it. So, particularly for AFB, that's known as a pepper pot brood pattern. So, rather than great patches disappearing, you'll see things disappear sort of individually, if you like. You'll see the capping start to sink, start to become slimy, they start to become concave as opposed to convex. And I like to say it looks like someone's gone round the edge with a tin opener. You've got that little picture in the bottom right, that sort of crusty looking capping with a really jagged edge. You see perforations as nurse bees nibble a hole and decide what's left inside is worth removing or they can't remove it. And that's where we get the sliminess. So after Bacillus larvae has broken down the pupa inside, what's left after the nutrition's been used up is just spores. And these spores last for a heck of a long time. Officially 40 plus years, but with spores from other genuses, tuberculosis, for example, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, in the bandages of Egyptian mummies, those spores will germinate in the lab perfectly happily. So it's a very, very hardy stasis, if you like. Bacillus larvae wants to kill the colony. It dries out, it forms these hard scales, and then it sits there waiting to be out by other colonies or to be reoccupied by swarms. And once again, with all the breakdown of everything inside that colony, you're more likely to get an unpleasant smell. So it's zoomed in, but hopefully you can see the jagged edges of these sunken cappings where the nurse bees have begun to decided maybe we won't. And of course on here you'll notice immediately that there's the AFB, there's lots of sliminess in there, jagged edges, sunken cappings, there's even some Varroa towards the left hand side. So you won't necessarily get individual complaints in the colony, they can coexist together. And of course, we have this classic ropiness. So after you've opened up your dodgy looking capping, if you're not seeing a pupil face looking back at you, the chances are there's something seriously wrong. You pop your matchstick in, it could be a twig, it could be your tweezers, and as you withdraw it, it will rope into this slimy, snotty brown rope. And just like the white gut for EFB, this is your gold standard test for AFB, American foulbrood. If you see a ropey matchstick, pick up the phone. And then I mentioned the scale. So the colony's died. It's been absolutely ravaged by pain bacillus larvae. And what you get then is that drying out of the remains in the bottom of the cell. So if you're holding a frame by the lugs, you've got the bottom of that frame away from you, and you're looking into the bottom of the cells. These are the dried out remains of the larvae, the pupae, sorry, that you're going to see. These are the scales. These are very hard, crispy, crunchy to the touch. The bees can't remove them, and if you have a pair of tweezers, you will struggle to pull it out without destroying the cell that it's in. So that's the key difference between EFB scale, which, as I say, you're very unlikely to see, and AFB scale. A is very hard, E soft, rubbery, and the crucial difference is looking at it is this structure that's left behind by AFB seem to break down. And again, that's another distinguishing feature. So what would you test here? It's a reasonable looking frame. Brood pattern's a bit dodgy. It's not awful. It's not crying out for investigation, but look a bit closer. Okay, yeah, we've got some cappings that are looking a bit jagged. They're not looking smooth, are they? They're not smooth. There's certainly nobody nibbling their way out. So we take the cap. There is nobody looking back at us. There really should be under a capping, people head looking back at us, be that a pink eye stage, white head, but or maybe it's about and there really doesn't look like anyone's home. And of course, you put your matchstick in and you find it roping afterwards. That is your classic AFB rope test. So, some hot facts for you then. I've already talked about the spores being viable for just about forever. If it's on your supers, the combs, the boxes, they are just waiting to start a new infection. And just like EFB, it's not an American problem. That's just where the lab that did the work was. It's the ancient. It has co-evolved with honeybees. Progression is fatal. Unlike EFB that can bubble away and disappear and come back and disappear, AFB will rip through a colony and it will destroy a colony. It penetrates the gut lining as opposed to living quietly in the intestines and invades the tissues of the pupa. The colony will die out once AFB has established itself. Once again, in absence of evidence, we know the score. We can't wait to be presented with the facts. We have to take action today and have good hygiene practices. However, if it does establish itself, you will see symptoms quickly. Unlike EFB that hides away, AFB is going to present itself and it's going to rip through your apiaries and rip through your colonies. So, evil wizard of complacency. Don't wait for those things to happen. It hasn't happened to me yet. We can take positive and affirmative action today. It doesn't need to be scary. Got a plan, guys. So once again, at this point, I would ask ID actions. So I'm sure we're all familiar with hand washing. It wasn't too long ago that we were sticking swabs up our noses and thinking about hygiene. And these things are relatively similar. So through bee diseases, we have drift between colonies, we have robbing of dead out colonies or weak colonies, movement of materials, movement of hives, reuse of equipment, frames. I could wax lyrical. I'm sure we could all put our fingers, count on one hand, the things that we do individually. That, on balance, so long as we know what we're doing, are probably okay. Things like not cleaning down equipment, not cleaning our hive tools that we really. And so the number one vector for transmission of any disease in bees is, of course, me, you, us, the beekeeper. We use gloves. We have hive tools going into the most intimate colony. We've got spacers and other little accoutrements to beekeeping. We've got the supers, the locks. We always touch them to take them off. We touch them to put them back on. And just look at those bellows. Where your fingers sit on the bellows, have a look at your smoker tonight or tomorrow morning and see just how much material can gather there. Maybe you got your smoker for Christmas. Maybe it's pristine. Let's keep it that way. But it's a place going hive to hive, site to site, in and out of your beekeeping world where these things can gather and move. And of course, swarms. Where do swarms come from? I love to hear how people only ever collect their swarms. And I think, wow, these beekeepers have got so much time. They can literally watch their hives 24/7. They've got live camera feeds and they know for a fact that one that bush, in that apiary, definitely things we can do clean down. So we've touched on stress briefly. There are various ways the colony can be stressed, but ultimately, the higher the level of stress in a colony, the more things are going wrong. Tough outside, is it cold? Have they got enough food? Are we doing manipulations, dropping hives in the middle of the night? All these things can cause stress, and an underlying infection that was otherwise asymptomatic might subsequently become symptomatic. And of course, swarm collecting. What a great public service. It's really important that we don't leave all these swarms lying around to set up homes in places that we can't manage them. It really is a public service. And in a questionnaire that was run some time ago, there were about two-thirds of the respondents that were using some old comb inside of their bait boxes or to house swarms that they had gone and collected. But my question to you is, what does this frame represent? What does it represent? Well, it's not really worth anything. It's a pretty old knackered frame. You've lost quite a few of the cells across the bottom. There's some drone cell in there. The cells are getting really small, so any developing workers are going to be smaller. But let's be honest, what we're looking at here is the corpse remains of a dead out colony. This might be like going to your nursing home where perhaps your parents are, going to the hospital where your dear loved ones and friends might be and in dirty robes, dirty bedding, old bandages, somebody else's clothing, and that being okay. And yet, as beekeepers, we will take this frame and we will use it, perhaps with good intentions, to help a colony start up and get established. But what if that frame had an underlying infection in it, was contaminated with infectious bacteria? What if the colony that's just arrived has a honey crop from the previous colony, previous hive, that is itself full of either spores, AFB, or EFB? And you've given them a drawn frame to help them deposit that and get back out. And now we've seeded an infection. So what might we do differently? It's pretty straightforward. If you're taking a swarm, put it on fresh foundation. Don't feed it for 3 days. You can feed it on the third day, at the end of the third day if you want, start feeding, but give them time to get through their honey crop, to burn through that honey crop. They bring their lunchbox with them, they bring that energy with them to start a new home. Let them clear that and then start feeding them. If you have drawn comb that you want to use and it's not knackered like this, it's still fairly decent drawn comb, it's a risk. But if it's a swarm that you've let clear the honey crop for at least 3 days and you know where your comb has come from, and I'm only saying this because I can wax lyrical till the cows come home, but realistically, there is still things that people are going to want to do. So reduce the risk. That's all I can ask you to do. Could you quarantine it? Could you take it to a different apiary? Maybe some of us don't have many apiaries to do that with. So could you just give it some distance? Reduce the drift between colonies. And if we consider the brood cycle, we've got maybe a prime swarm with a mated queen, or we've got maybe a virgin queen that's going to take even longer. But in the case of a prime swarm, how long is it going to take that colony to have capped brood once it starts drawing comb? Probably it's not going to be drawing comb for a day or two. It's not going to have capped brood for maybe up to 10 days, at least 8. So within those first 10 days, if you can get a Varroa treatment onto your swarm, you will clean up the vast majority of the Varroa. It has nowhere to hide. So you've given it 3 days to clear. You're now feeding it, supporting it, and you've given it a Varroa treatment. Fantastic. Fantastic. Something like oxalic acid, where there's no capped brood for Varroa to hide in, would be a really easy, quick way of treating that swarm at that time. So, just to pick up the pace a little bit, what happens if you get a diagnosis of a foulbrood, be it American or European? Well, I'd like you to focus on the right-hand side of this graph here, where we've got shook swarm, that's the SSW, or destruction. We don't do OTC anymore, that's an antibiotic. It's shook swarm or destruction. For AFB, it's always destruction. Because of those spore-forming bacteria, there's no other choice. But for European foul brood, we can, if the colony is relatively healthy, is relatively large, low level of infection, we can go through a shook swarm. And that's just like housing a swarm, as we've mentioned. Fresh foundation, fresh boxes, don't feed before 3 days, do a Varroa treatment to help support that health, and then get the rest of your kit cleaned up. And the only bits that go in the fire are the frames, even in AFB. So your boxes, your supers, your floors, your crown boards, your roofs, we'll scrape that, we'll scorch that, get it nice and cleaned up. And if you're not using wood, maybe you're on poly or plastic parts, then there's a soda and bleach solution for that as well. So I'm moving at pace because this is just one facet and we've got a lot more to go through, but you can always come back to me and we can always go through that in more detail. So you could do a shook swarm, you can set your hive up. Why would you bother reporting? You could just stay under the radar. You could just sort it out yourself, right? Well, there are two fantastic reasons why you want to pick up the phone. Neither of them are the legal responsibility to do so, so you're actually required by law to report suspicions of a notifiable disease. And it's nothing to do with the fact that you'll get somebody like myself and my colleagues coming to help you for free. Free expert labour to help sort out the problem. So why would you pick up the phone in addition to those reasons? Well, firstly, we want the information through to the lab. We want to understand where the disease is going, where in the country they're popping up. Fantastic. We've already talked about that. But the other one is that as a BBK member, and here you are on the BBK course, so I'm assuming you're a member, you've already got insurance for 3 hives. And if you've got more, it's super cheap to increase your cover. It's less than £20 for up to about 50 colonies. So I don't know of any insurance deal that's as good as that. It's very, very quick to get paid. You can take your shed full of equipment that we're going to clean this year, next year, reassemble, refurbish. That can go in the fire. You can get paid for that as well. So you can get it cleaned up and you can get it paid. Now, I'm going to save you some more money. I always get asked the question, should I be carrying one of these lateral flow devices, just like the COVID tests? Currently, the foulbrood test is still in redevelopment. And to be honest, because we're the only country that uses it, I'm not sure it's going to come back, but watch this space. But regardless, why would you want to keep it? Because it costs you money. Do you know exactly how to use it? It's only a single use after all. And actually, if we open it up and we're using it, it's because we suspect that there's a notifiable disease in our colony. So we've already transgressed that legal requirement to pick up the phone. And guess what I'm going to bring as an inspector? I'm going to bring that taxpayer funded test kit. So don't go and buy yourself one. Let me bring it. Get yourself a pair of these bad boys. Get yourself some tweezers. You can pull all sorts of things out of a comb with tweezers. You can investigate all sorts of things that are going on. You can look at the gut. You can pull it apart on your hive tool like a little wee inspection table, and you can take a really nice photo. That would actually be fantastic. And if I get a photo, I will come back to you within 24 hours as to whether that's something you really need to worry about, or is it just a bit of moldy pollen, as is often the case? I would get 100 photos of moldy pollen and be very happy. So, health checker, like a bee inspector. Remember, clear the comb. Get every last bee off the comb. You need to be able to see the cells. And what I would do personally is make a job of doing a health inspection. So don't do it alongside honey cropping or looking for queen cells because it requires a lot of time and a lot of attention. It's a lot of energy. And if you're trying to do other things in the same day, you might find it a bit difficult to do everything to the level that you want to do it. Now, of course, if you've only got 1 or 2 colonies, or a small number, fantastic. You're not going to have a problem. But if you're running multiple apiaries, tens of colonies, make it a specific job. So inspect every frame in the brood box, right to the edges. You're going to find brood in some weird places. The queen, she gets about. Frequency of doing it, at the very least at the start of the year, before you start investing your time and your energy and start moving things around. Maybe you're bringing bees back from a crop that you want to pollinate or get some honey from, maybe a bit of borage, or maybe you've traveled for some bean or something. So these sort of risky times, it's a good idea to give things a look over before they come home. Take photos, get in touch, and as you'll see later, you can even submit samples. So dissection for EFB, we've seen our suspicious slumpy cell. We've pulled it out. We're going to put it on our hive tool like a wee dissection bench, and we're going to go from a closed position to an open position. So that's stretching the gut, that's stretching the larvae, and we can pull the gut out. And there's your creamy white gut, Melissococcus plutonius, European foulbrood, almost definitely. And if this was somebody sending me this video, I would probably be there to, yeah, let's. And better yet, if you do take these larvae, keep them for me because I'll then submit them, save you the postage, and get you diagnosed by the lab. So AFB, we open up our capping. There's nobody looking back at us. We put our tweezers in, and sure enough, we can see the gloopiness, the ropiness, nothing like it. That's AFB. You can see just how sticky that is. The bees really struggle to remove it. So reporting disease is like internet dating. It's It doesn't have quite such a happy ending, perhaps, the internet dating that is, but ultimately you must take good photos. So ideally in focus, well lit, taken from above, looking down on your subject of interest in the photo somewhere, just a picture of a frame. And is there something wrong with this? What there might be. It's going to take me a while to look at that. So tell me what I'm supposed to be looking at, point to it if you want. And if you can include more than one photograph, it could even be of the same thing, but more than one photograph is generally helpful. So sample packaging then, because it is on the syllabus, you can tick that one off. What are you going to do? If you've got a wee tube, a little pot, a jam jar, all these things are fine for taking a few larvae, symptomatic larvae specifically. So not just a random larvae that from a colony and we want to know if it's diseased or not. The larvae that I'll be selecting in the field will be those larvae that look like they've got a problem. So that's a good place to start. So a handful of larvae, two or three in a tube and a pot, that's enough. If you suspect a poisoning, and I should state now, this is really, really rare, really, really rare. And the vast majority of calls that I have about poisoning, you ask a few questions, you understand that, they've got five colonies, one has fallen over. Well, they can't all be feeding on different food sources. They must have all flown to that field next door where they saw the farmer's tractor rolling around. They wouldn't have ignored it. So but there are things you can notice that are more likely or more suspicious. So particularly where bees are crawling, dying inside and outside of the colony, struggling to walk, sudden mass death, tongues protruding. You might have an odor. There could be substances, powders in the colony. It's not unheard of for people to do things, although it is very rare, and residues as well. Whatever you see, whatever you suspect, contact the National Bee Unit first. Pick up the phone, send a message. We'll have a chat. We'll go through it together and try and work out what's the most likely course of events. And in the event that we think actually this has got some legs to it, then we will ask you with gloves to take a sample of 200 bees in a wee matchbox. You can bag that. That wants to go in the freezer. And if we think there's, as I say, there's suspicion here, we will do an on-site investigation and we will take that sample if we haven't already taken one ourselves. And that's about as far as that needs to go. So you don't need to be sending that off yourself without having that conversation first, because as I say, it's incredibly rare, very distressing to find your colony has died, very unlikely to be poisoning, I'm happy to say. And what about comb samples then? So maybe you've noticed there's some of that black scale inside of your comb. Do you want to be sending that whole frame in? No, no, I don't think you do. Just remember, loser. And that's about the size of the piece of comb that you want to send. That could be in a wee box, that could be in an ice cream tub. Doesn't particularly matter. And you can send that through to the lab. But make sure it contains, again, the subject of interest, the thing you want us to look at and tell you is it healthy or not. You can find the voluntary sample forms online. This is just a screenshot of it. Just Google voluntary sample form or sample submission National Bee Unit. You can get hold of one of these, and it's, as you can see, pretty run-of-the-mill details. And if this isn't filled in, we can't help you. So packaging for dispatch, then you've got your sample. You're going to make sure that's in a secondary form of containment. A sandwich bag is absolutely fine. You're going to make sure that your details are included, and you're going to dispatch it to the National Bee Unit. Again, if you're not sure of the address, you can find it online, but the easiest thing to do, if I'm honest, and this is what I would do, I am lazy by nature, I would just contact your local inspector and get them to either collect it or get them to tell you the details. But crucially, do not send it on a Friday. If you're sending it yourself, do not send it on a Friday, because if you're sending it next day, it will arrive there on Saturday. It'll get put in the sun and it will just sit there and bake. So don't send it on a Friday. Monday to Thursday, those are the 2 days that you want to be sending stuff. So you found something really suspicious in the hives. You're not really sure at this point, and you're going to make your phone call. But what do you do there and then in the moment? Well, firstly, finish work on that hive if you can. Mark it in some way. Put the grass under a brick. Turn it. Do something to set it apart. Take a photo colony. Change your gloves. Absolutely change your gloves. If your suit's soiled and you don't have a spare one with you, then I think that's probably it for the day. Or if you have to, come back, but don't keep using that suit. And if you're in a shed apiary, or maybe you've got colleagues that help you, make sure you tell them. Make sure you tell them, oh yeah, colony three, I think there's a problem there. And if other people are in that shared apiary with their own colonies, you really want to tell them. They really need to know. And ultimately, you want to initiate a self-imposed standstill. So you can take your suit, you can put that in a bin bag, take it home, get it washed, but you don't want to start moving bees and equipment around for what I hope are very obvious reasons. Observe strict hygiene, wash your boots down, get your kit washed, clear up any bits of wax, make sure anything from that colony goes back into it. And as that final tip I'll give you for any kind of hygienic practice is follow those hands because they go everywhere. They touch door handles, gear knobs, they touch phones, they touch notepads, they touch pens, they touch the trug full of beekeeping kit and pens and queen cages and all the paraphernalia. And if your hands are contaminated, those things are as well. And if those things aren't cleaned down, guess what's waiting for you next time you pick it up? So follow your hands and have a think. Now, ultimately, many people will use leather gloves, heavy duty gloves for perfectly reasonable reasons. But if you can stretch to disposable gloves or at least a layer that you can clean, that would be a very good thing. So a pair of marigolds, if you can stretch to it, or disposable gloves. Ultimately, foulbrood hates cleanliness, diseases hate cleanliness, and so for the shiniest hive tool, the secret that bee inspectors do want you to know about, and recently updated as well. Come on, I need that to disappear at the top. This is my moment. 99p or EFB. AFB, not for me. Now, of course, inflation has made a mockery of this title. Soda crystals now cost a whopping £2 a kilo from Tesco's and other supermarkets. You can get a 5 kilo bag for a bit cheaper from, I think, B&Q. And you can go to wholesalers, particularly Chinese wholesalers, Chinese food wholesalers. They'll sell you a 20 kilo bag at quite a good price. But what you need for yourself, for your own solution, is 1 kilo of soda, 150 mils of Domestos. No, I'm not on commission. It's because it's a standard bleach and it comes at 4.5% hypochlorite. You can use other bleaches, but you're going to have to do some maths if you do. But that 4.5%, when mixed with the soda and 4.5 litres of water, will bring you to the correct concentration of 1.5% by volume. Why is that significant? We did some science at the start of last year, and we looked at equipment that we were carrying, equipment we were using, and whether there was viable European foul brood bacteria on that equipment. And we found that actually just soda on its own, whilst it was washing and removing the vast majority of that bacteria, which is why we don't find EFB everywhere the inspectors go. Believe me, there's enough of us to know if that was the case, we would know about it. But we can always improve. And so we tested it down to 1.25% by volume and found that that gave complete killing. Complete killing. This is of bleach, sodium hypochlorite. So at 1.5%, you've got some leeway. That's why we say 150 mils at 4.5%. Domestos, you can get it from Aldi. At the moment, as of January 2026, it costs about a quid. And that's 750 mils. So that's going to last you a little while. But what I would recommend you do, because if you've got a handful of colonies, you probably don't need 5 litres of this stuff. Actually, just a litre at a time is probably fine. So mix your soda solution first. That's your kilo of soda, 4.5 litres of water. You're going to end up with about 5 litres. And then when you want to make a new solution, you want to replace the last one that's starting to go brown or you've had it for 2 weeks since you last used it, pour that away, not into a watercourse, please, but pour it away, household chemical, so it can go down the sink. Take a litre of that soda solution and add a bit more than a shot of your bleach, 30 mils. That will give you the right concentration, that will give you the right strength of solution, and you can use that. Now, the bleach itself, it will react very slowly, so you can't keep that solution stored for a long time, a few days at the most, but you can replace it. And actually, that's a good thing because you're washing away the contaminants, you're sterilizing your tools, and then you got yourself a nice fresh solution at the same time. And remember your suits. Now, if you're using a sheriff suit, I thoroughly recommend you take the hood off, hand wash that bad boy. If you're using a BB suit, my experience is if you tuck the hood inside the suit, they survive just fine. But overall, any worries, just hand wash it. And we wash at 40 degrees with normal detergent. Remember, it's not sterilizing at this point, it's about washing away the contaminants. Replace your set in the tool bucket, get yourself a metal scourer, and have a wonderfully shiny tool. So where else might you go? I'm not going to labour the point, but follow your hands, follow your supers. These are all places that we store equipment, all places that come into contact with wax and the honey, things that can potentially carry contamination. So follow it around. Come back to slide 75 5 as to where to look to clean later this month. And then looking, now admittedly, these are larger operations, but you can see you've got nice separation of kit by apiary. The floor is nice and clean. That's the top right image there in the middle. So some of these have come from my time in New Zealand. In the middle there, we're cropping. There's bees everywhere. We've got that frame for blowing the bees out of the supers. It's going colony to colony. Well, what if there's a problem? What kit do we use? Frame holders. But a frame holder goes colony to colony. And when do we last clean it down? And then if we're doing work at home, maybe, we've got a partner that does the extraction for us. I was never dating Wayne there up on the top left, but Wayne himself as a worker, he's in contact with all this kit. Potentially, if he's not careful, he's going to be moving that to other kit as well. So be really careful and just have a think. Small changes can have a really, really positive impact. So task yourself, do a fire drill. Tell yourself you found 3 cases of EFB if you've got 3 or more hives. Maybe you've got it in more than one apiary. What are you going to do? Do you know where your kits come from? Do you know where the bees have come from? Do you know where you stored a super that you took off last week? Has it touched supers from 4 different apiaries and now it's all in the mix? When we extract our frames in our 9 frame extractor and there's 10 frames in the super, does that last frame go back in the right box or does it just go in the next and roll on and on and on and on and on? So have a think. Lots of little things. And again, I'm happy to talk about this in detail. I can't tell you everything here and now. All I can do is inspire you. Come on now, what does the top of this one say? This is welcome to spring. Welcome to spring. So we're going to leave the foul broods behind now. We're going to talk about the next most exciting thing in looking after healthy bees. So maybe your bees are going to look like this in a few weeks' time. I'm certainly not opening mine up right now. Maybe for some oxalic acid, but I'm not going through the brood box. Maybe they look like this. We've seen this photo before. Maybe they look like this. And there's lots of pollen, and the willow is out, and it's coming in. It's disrupting the laying pattern. There's a bit of stores and fresh nectar there, and oh cripes. Okay. Well, that one's bit in the dust, hasn't it? And that probably died a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. That's looking a bit mouldy. Massive brood nest. I mean, what were they doing in December to get that? Blimey. Okay. Well, I've got some news for you. The very last thing that's going to be alive in this colony, if we look closer, we look really, really close, it's going to be Varroa. If there's anything that's going to survive to the bitter end in your colony, if there's anything that's going to upset your colony, it's going to be Varroa. It's a tiny mite. It is our biggest problem. It is the leading cause of colony death globally. And yes, there are different philosophies and ways of thinking about how we might get to a Varroa free or Varroa tolerant or Varroa resistant future. But the reality is, left to their own devices, bees do not stay as nice, big, friendly colonies. They get smaller, they swarm a lot more. They try and manage it themselves, but they need our intervention and we need to manage it. So, as a parasite that came in the 90s, our bees that left the Indian subcontinent millions of years ago, left the other 20 plus different species behind with Varroa, are not exposed to Varroa, have not been exposed to Varroa in their recent history, far, far longer than our history. The adult mites then feed on both the hemolymph and the fat bodies. Historically, we thought it was maybe one or the other. It turns out it's both. Hemolymph is a bit like the bee blood. Fat bodies is a super important organ, particularly for overwintering, for energy conversion from food stores, for production of biomolecules, for rearing brood, feeding brood. If that's knackered because of the Varroa, that's a huge survival pressure on your bees. And of course, they also, as a walking hypodermic needle, carry viruses which can exert their own pressures and cause their own problems. And as beekeepers, this costs us time, it costs us money, there is revenue loss, crop loss, if you like, and also the ethics. What are the ethics of putting substances into a hive, and what are the ethics of doing nothing, potentially, leaving them to it? So lots of conversations to have around Varroa, but I want to give you some objective facts today. So when we look for Varroa, where do we look for it? Well, some look through the colony and try to see it riding around on the backs of the bees. So these are the phoretic mites, the adult mites that are ready to jump ship and go elsewhere. Have a look at Dr. Samuel Ramsey's papers. This one's from 2019. He actually mapped where the Varroa was hiding out on the bees. And you can see if you're looking for those riding phoretic mites, you're going to see less than 1% of them there on the thorax in the middle. Less than 1%. So for every thorax riding mite that you see, there's going to be roughly 99 others that you haven't seen. And where are they hiding out? They're down here on this red dot. That's the other nearly two-thirds of the mite population. And guess what's down there by your kidneys, or in the case of your bee, that would be the fat body. Absolutely delicious. Right up there under the exoskeleton, biting through the cuticle to feed on that lovely juicy fat body. So why don't the bees groom it off? Why can't they detect it? Well, it's a fantastic mimic of pheromones. It doesn't smell other. It has been reared and grown inside the cells. It's in the colony, so it smells like home. Delicious. But also just look at how wedged it is there underneath the scales. That shape of the Varroa mite really helps it to burrow deeply under the scales. Not a chance that that's going to get brushed off. And if you don't believe me, this is on the left is that same mite after they removed it to do an electron micrograph image. And what's left behind? The imprint of the mite, the footpads of the mite are there, and of course the hole that it has bitten into the adult bee's cuticle. So we've got a little schematic on the bottom right there, that yellow and green blob. So those are the two sets of grinding mouth parts that the Varroa uses to bite through, grind through, and feed on the interior of your adult bees. And that's a scar, that's a wound that's not going to heal. So in addition to the viruses that it transmits, there's also this mechanical damage in addition to the actual feeding on the bee, the deprivation of the bee of that vitality. And those are the mouth parts. If you've seen the Alien films, it's not dissimilar to the tongue that comes out and makes people's heads explode, excuse me. Really the stuff of nightmares. So briefly, the life cycle, because there's a few things here that I think are really worth looking at. So we've got feeding 4 hours post capping. The mite is hiding in the bottom of a cell with a larvae in it. It's got a little snorkel, sits there under the brood food, and then it starts laying eggs between 6 and 70 hours. So up to about day 11, it's going to start laying eggs. This is what, 3 days after capping. First egg is always male. It's always male, and that brother mite then mates with all of his sisters. And the mother mite is laying one egg every 30 hours. So a bit more than a day. There's another egg, there's another egg, there's another egg, there's another egg. And how long to maturity? Just 20 hours. So before that mother mite has even laid the next egg, 10 hours before, that original egg has mated with that male and is now ready to rumble. When that bee hatches, the adult mites leave with it, and they might ride around for a while, they might crawl around in the hive, or they might spread somewhere else. So when we think about treating for Varroa, it's really important to consider the season and also the lay of the land around our hives. Are we in an area with lots and lots of colonies? Are we out in the sticks with nobody around? I would guarantee you, with the access to the databases that I have, there will be more beekeepers closer to you than you would think. Almost definitely. Almost definitely. And in her lifespan, that mite will breed 3 to 4 times. So if we have a really nice long summer, warm autumn, and we treat in August, but it's warm until October, there's a really high chance that if people around us are not treating or not able to manage their Varroa for whatever reason, or they just don't kill enough of it in the first place, there's a very high chance that through these phoretic mites, drift of bees, and that can be for up to kilometers, we might see that level coming back up. But they reproduce fantastically quickly, just 20 hours to maturity. And then, of course, there arrive the mites. So, as I say, a tiny mite, but by far our biggest problem. And then, of course, we have all these other effects, and I'm not going to read them all off to you. You can look at the screen, you can see it. But these are the things that the Varroa are causing to our colony. These are the effects that it's having ultimately, and I would say from my experience, within about 3 years. So 3 seasons. You've got really big productive colony at the end of the year, and then come January, it's gone because it's had 3 years of building up, and maybe the last time you treated was December last year. You didn't kill enough of the mites. They were at a high level in spring, and they just kept reproducing through the season. And I've just had a conversation with, well, actually a couple of people on this basis, and their colonies are full of Varroa. But of course, on top of that, here comes the beekeeper. Oh, so we're mucking about in the hive. There are other problems, wasps, stresses, the climate, the weather, all these stresses. All of these things exert a survival pressure in addition to the problems that Varroa cause. And of course, Varroa, as I've said, carries viruses. 5 confirmed, 13 more suspected. It is a really, really dirty hypodermic needle, along with that mechanical damage. And it's a chronic burden. It's chronic. So your colony is not going to fall over after the first virus or the first mite. But over time, the mite level increases, the viral burden increases, and what is a burden that the colony can sustain, it hits a threshold and then it falls over and it dies. And that can happen very suddenly, and it can be shocking and it can be really surprising. And how many mites does it take? Well, just one. Because remember, within 20 hours, that female mite has mated with her brother, so she's ready to lay eggs. She's gravid, she comes out of the cell, and she's ready to go. Does it affect our queens? Well, here's a queen in one of my colonies on the left there. You can see her crawling around. She's actually a virgin, I think, because there's the other incumbent queen, big, lovely golden Italian. And I'm sorry to say that was supersedure, and the golden Italian went and was left with that little virgin. But she was a good bit queen. But another colony, then we look closely, and this is a colony I have here in Haverhill in Suffolk. She's got a rider. She actually has a phoretic mite on her back. That's not a brawler. That is a Varroa mite. That is a colony that was donated, had all sorts of problems, and I spent 2025 almost as an experiment, really, just seeing what it would take to take what was essentially a failing colony and build it back up again. And I'm pleased to say it's doing very well at the moment, but there is a Varroa mite, and it's actually hiding now between the thorax and the abdomen. So it takes one mite, and they absolutely affect our queens. So what about for the rest of the year then? We haven't treated for Varroa yet. We know there are Varroa in our colony. So what's happening later? Well, we do get this thing called uncapping. And what you're looking at here is called bold brood. And this can be caused by things like wax moth that tunnel through the comb. But in those cases, it tends to be long linear lines as it burrows through. In this case, it's quite scattered, quite dispersed. And there's that lovely white, pink-eyed pupil face looking back at us. And this is a nurse response to a problem. Some people call it hygienic behavior, and that's as far as it goes. If I've got fleas or my dog's got fleas, I'm going to scratch. Would we call that hygienic behavior? In a manner of speaking, but there's clearly a problem. It's not a good sign if your bees are trying to find and finding a problem. Ideally, the problem wouldn't be there. So, what's going on in hygienic behavior? There are a few different theories about the basis, but the pheromone element is the same across them all. So, within hygienic behavior, there are probably about 10 key pheromones. There are others, but there are some key players in there. And the first of that is a beta osmine. That's the light blue at the top there. And that says, feed me, feed me. I'm damaged. And oh, look, there's Varroa hiding in the bottom. So in an open cell, beta osmine says, feed me, and they get fed by the nurse bees. In a capped cell, that's I'm damaged, or something's happening to damage me. Come and investigate. We've then got tetrachontine. That's your Varroa-fested pheromone. So that says, yep, there is Varroa in here. Come and uncap me. And that's the behavior that it induces. And then if you've got deformed wing virus as well as Varroa, you get heptacocine. And that's another uncapping inducing pheromone. And then maybe things are really bad and you get oleic acid. This is the I'm dead, I'm dying, I'm decaying. Come and collect me, mortuary bees, and throw me out the front door. So this is a two-way street. You need larvae and pupae that exhibit these pheromones, and you also need nurse bees that are receptive to it. And it isn't a binary thing. If the tiniest amount of pheromone resulted in 100% uncapping, that would clearly be a massive waste of time and energy. Equally, if everybody's screaming out for uncapping and the nurses are off having a fag behind the shed, then that's also not a good thing. So there are gradients, there are shades of grey as to how much of this hygienic behavior we would expect, how much we consider to be helpful. Ultimately, once these cells are opened, Varroa mites that are exposed to the open air that are immature won't survive. They will dry out, they won't survive. So this is part of the idea, or at least part of the thinking behind the idea of hygienic behavior, to try and disrupt the life cycle. We mentioned earlier about those jagged edges to cells. Here's a really nice example then. You can see those cells are being closed up, and just look how smooth those cells are. They're really not jagged at all in the same way. That hole is moving towards the middle of the cell. So this is a capping response now. Things are being capped over. So what else then? Well, left unmanaged varrosis, which is the state of having Varroa, which is every colony in Britain, to varying degrees, of course. It can progress to parasitic mite syndrome. So I'm just going to refer to that as PMS now. And one of the key things then, you're looking down at your pupae and you can see there's a head there, there's a tongue sticking out. It's dead on arrival. That developing bee has been parasitized to such an extent that upon hatching, normally it would be fed by a nurse bee, and it's been abandoned. It's so weak it can't even climb out of the cell. It's just about got as far as sticking its tongue out, begging for help, and it's been abandoned. And this is really the terminal stage of virosis. This is the very last legs of a colony that is being parasitized to such an extent that its next generation is not going to make it. That colony will fail. Later, then, of course, we've also got sackbrood. So this is a fairly common, non-notifiable minor condition. You tend to see it when the colony is stressed, small number of workers doing a lot of different jobs, and you end up with what you'll read of as this sort of Chinese slipper. But I'm going to be honest, it's really hard to pull a sackbrood cell out of the cell and actually look at it side on. They normally fall apart, but what you'll get is a fluid-filled cell with almost like a cellophane-like wrapping. And if you want to imagine, take your fingers and make a circle with your thumb and finger, lay your finger across the palm. Hopefully the camera is showing that. I'll put it in front of my face if it's not. But if you wiggle your index finger through that little circle you've just made with your fingers, that's the mouth of the larvae looking back at you from inside the cell. And that's your classic presentation of a sac brood. It is a virus. As your colony grows in numbers, you will generally see it resolve as the season picks up with those colony numbers. If you see many cells on the scale that you see before you, then I would really start to consider whether there are things you can do to support your colony's health. Treat for Varroa. Could you feed it? Do you need to change some frames to reduce the viral burden in that colony? Do you need to requeen, find a less susceptible line of bees? But generally speaking, not too much of a problem. We've talked about parasitic mite syndrome, but you can just see again how these cells, these pupae have been abandoned. They're actually being nibbled down. They're being chucked out, uncapped. They've starved and died in the cell. But crucially, it's that protruding tongue on a dead pupa. What you can see is where you get a whole lot of varroa mites alongside sac brood, you get something which looks, for all intents and purposes, it really does look like European foulbrood, and you can see how it's slumping across the cell there. But again, take those tweezers that you cleverly bought the other day, pull those cells out, and you can even see in the cells already there are varroa mites literally sat on top of those dead larvae. And if you pull them out, you'll probably find more larvae besides. And what I suspect is happening is you've got something on the way to sac brood, that sort of larvae lying across the cell, up the cell if you like, but it's being puncture holes that it's starting to dehydrate. That's the working theory from my side. That's anecdotal, but certainly you will get this sort of pseudo EFB, and it's very common. That said, do not go into your colony and see this and think, it's just a bit of sac brood. Definitely take a photo, pick up the phone. Don't take that chance, please. Don't ignore it. Deformed wing virus, another Varroa carried virus. Um, Larvae that are parasitized at early stages of their development, the virus gets into the wing buds, and if it's sufficient, it disrupts the development of the wings. You'll see these bees in your colony crawling around, and you might see the deformed wings, but more often than not, what you will see actually is a bee with its head right in the bottom of the cell, and you can just see its bum poking back. And if you sort of tickle the back of the abdomen, that bee reverses out. And again, more often than not, they have these deformed wings. Those bees are done for. They're not going to live more than a few days at most in the colony before they get chucked out. But this is, the end of well, the terminal stages of a high level of Varroa. So if you start to see DWV, you could be sure that your Varroa levels are high. There are different flavors of DWV, so have a look online. There are A and B types, and they displace each other. There's lots of interesting viral dynamics, but too much detail for today. I'll just have a sip. My voice is just starting to fade. Mm. So, funnily enough, we do see and have seen the last couple of years more chronic bee paralysis virus, but it's not transmitted by Varroa. It's not transmitted by Varroa, which is really it's transmitted in just about every transfer, grooming behavior, brushing up against each other, brushing up against dead bees, which are incidentally the most infectious thing you can find in a case of chronic bee paralysis virus, off of the hive floor, particularly the entrance, hive tool, your hands, you name it. But what actually is chronic bee paralysis virus? Well, as the name suggests, it's a virus and it paralyzes your bees. It comes in two delicious flavors. In the type 1, you get bees that more or less look normal, but they have a shaking, almost itchy looking behavior. Whilst in the type 2, you get bees that can more or less move normally, but they end up looking hairless and greasy. They go black and dark, and they will be paralyzed and they will die later on. This is a video I took from one of my hives in Cambridge a couple of years ago, and it was quite a distressing time. The client up to these hives to have a look at inches and inches and inches of bees dead out the front of the colony, and this is a very typical presentation. And then for those bees that hadn't yet died, you can a lot of very itchy bees as well. Bees that are kind of jerking, they're not really moving anywhere. And as we look closer, you can see the dark bees there. They're going hairless, they're stumbling about. And just look at the piles of bees on the bottom. I'll just bring that back again for you. So you can see, pick a bee and just watch it. Is it moving normally? Is it stumbling? Is it stuttering? So, this is a good type 1. There's a bit of hairlessness in there, but the vast majority of these bees have got good hairs. And I'm afraid there isn't really a treatment that I can recommend for you. Anecdotally, there are things that we can do, but if you're hearing advice about shaking bees out and carrying them, don't. Just don't, because the bees that fly back, they actually have just as much virus as the bees that were, falling around. Forward, help them remove dead and dying bees, make sure they're fed, make sure they've got space. It's generally a condition of very large congested colonies. Make sure your hygiene is up to scratch and get rid of the dead bees. Bit of science that was done earlier last year. Those bees can remain infectious for over a year and they're full of virus. So get rid of the dead bees. And it's pretty much a 50-50. And don't blame yourself, but it's a 50-50. This colony pulled through and is still growing great guns today, but it's not always the case. And it's something that we're certainly interested in working on. Then, bit of a change of pace. This is a lovely fungal disease, gets in and infects the developing leaf growth through and larvae like to something that resembles something like a fried egg on rice. So you can the yolk there in the middle, and then the white of the egg around it. And that is the high fungal structures growing to fill the cell. So you'll often see what are known as mummies on the bottom of the hive, the floor out the front. While they're blue, that's the reproductive stage for the fungus, and they go white later when they're finished. It tends to be a condition of damp areas, woodlands, where there's poor airflow. So, of course, increase the airflow, increase circulation, you can resolve some of the damp, but it can also be something that bees are genetically susceptible to. And so you will also see for cases where there's a big problem with chalk brood, change the queen line, the problem can often resolve. But again, if you're seeing an awful lot of it, not just one or two cells, think about those supportive measures. What can you do to look after your bees? And there's a close up for you. So you can see the larvae in the middle there poking up, and there's the fungal structure around it. Dysentery, Nosema, or possibly Nosema cereus. So, if you come to your colony and you find that there's a Jackson pollock waiting for you on the hive entrance, or in fact feces inside the hive, my alarm bells would certainly be ringing. Bees don't defecate inside the hive. They are fastidiously clean. They will fly to toilet elsewhere. However, if they're stuck inside for whatever reason for prolonged periods of time, if they're being fed pollen in the pollen patties in the middle of the winter, the pollen husks irritate the rectum and they have to go to the toilet, or they could have an infection. However, it's a little bit more complicated. So if you have a look at some of our fact sheets, you'll quickly notice that actually there's good science to say that probably more than 40% of colonies are actually affected with Nosema. Nosema apis is our native British Isles flavour of Nosema, and it causes dysentery, and it doesn't often kill the colony. It will slow the build up. It will probably reduce your honey yield, but it tends to be a springtime condition. It's a microsporidium, so it's not a fungus, it's not a bacteria, it's something a bit different. and it does sporulate, and the feces of the bees definitely contains spores, but it's not always a fatal condition. However, Nosema ceranae, which is an invasive new Asian originating strain, it will kill colonies, and actually it's much more virulent. Under the microscope, which is really the only way to understand if it's dysentery or Nosema, there's a slight difference in the spores. They're slightly more curved, but it's pretty subtle. But what you tend to find with Nosema ceranae is the sort of Mary Celeste type situation, which, if you're not familiar with the story of the ghost ship, there is a ship, breakfast on the table, but nobody's home. You come to your colony, and there's food, there's stores, there's a brood nest, and there's just nothing there. And this sudden collapse, that can be a symptom of Varroa, particularly where the levels are very, very high, but it can also be down to Nosema ceranae. And the only way to know is to dissect out your abdomens, grind them up with some distilled water, put them on a slide, and look at them under a microscope. Otherwise, general hygiene, once again, and supportive measures. So, if you're playing bingo, you'll see on your sheet that we have to understand the difference between Varroa and our friend, the bee louse. And I know probably most of us haven't seen a bee louse before, to be honest. They're quite rare these days, probably because of Varroa treatments. But it's an ectoparasite. It's not a mite. It's actually a wingless fly. And if you want to know more, my good friend Dr. Dan Williams is giving a talk in Warwickshire later this month. And that's actually where this video on the left comes from. So why this video? You can see the queen running around as an ectoparasite. They climb down onto the head of the bees and they steal a little bit of the nectar when they're sharing it via trophallaxis. And who's being fed all the time? Of course, it's the queen. So if you've got brawler, that's where you're going to find her. But they have these little mitts. Have a look online. There's some great pictures. They hang onto the hairs of the bees. They reproduce probably by laying eggs on pollen. And if you've got a lot of them, you will see their tracks through the comb. So it used to be a bit of an economic pest, but it doesn't harm the bees. It doesn't exert a survival pressure. It's living alongside. And to be honest, if we did enough science, we'd probably find they were doing something useful. But as I say, very rare these days. There are places, Isle of Wight, Colonsay up north in Scotland, and apparently Warwickshire, but something you're unlikely to see. So how would you tell the difference between that and Varroa? Well, when you're looking at it closely, and I admit, the queen is moving quickly here, but you can see it's got legs, has some pretty definitive legs. And I would say Varroa mite is sort of a purplish brown, burgundy brown, whilst the brawler is almost like a cherry pink when you see it in the flesh. So another rare, and I really want this banner at the top to naff off. I'm really sorry if this is blocking you. Endoparasites, acarine, tracheal mites, something that is very, very rare. The symptoms of which, when it is present, overlap with things like Varroa and Nosema. So it's quite hard to diagnose or really suspect. It tends to peak post-winter. So wintertime, things are clustering. These tracheal mites that live inside the breathing tubes of your bees, they love close proximity. They love close proximity, and they like drones as well, actually. But lots of flight, lots of big trachea to breed in. Post winter is when you tend to see the issues, because bees are now starting to try and fly again, and they can't. They basically can't get enough oxygen. It's kind of the smoker's lung of beekeeping, and they end up clustering under the hive entrance or near the hive entrance. They try and climb the grass to fly, and there's general sort of malaise and confusion. Again, it's difficult to know whether what you're looking at is acarine or something else. To be honest, it's pretty rare. As a mite, because we're treating for Varroa, we really are not seeing a lot of acarine anymore. It's more or less been wiped out. And even when it is around, it's rarely fatal. It tends to cause a dysregulation of the winter cluster because they can't breathe enough, so they want to spread out a little bit to get enough air. The CO2 is too high for them. But I think I would be surprised if anybody in the next 5 years of this group came back to me with acarine from their colonies. I'd be interested, but I'd be very, very surprised. And the way to find out then is to dissect the bee. You have to open up the thorax, get under the plates there, and look at the trachea. So top right, you can see the healthy tracheal structures. They're pink, they're juicy, a bit like a nice chicken breast, really. And it is all muscle up there, of course, in the thorax. Bottom left, we've got that smoker's lung. It's not looking too happy. And if you look under a good microscope, you'll see the scarring of the trachea where they feed on the interior of the bee. But as I say, relatively unlikely to ever trouble you. So what about non-pathogenic orders then? Because it wouldn't be a complete presentation without talking about drone laying workers or queens. So if you see spaghetti junction in the bottom of your cells, you're almost definitely looking at drone laying workers. You will find new queens or queens coming back into lay. They can sort of shotgun if you like. You might find two or three eggs, but they tend to be in the bottom of the cell. They tend to be nicely shaped. Drone laying worker is going to be everywhere. And because they're workers and because they're wandering everywhere, you'll find the drone everywhere as well. It's scattered about. Whilst the queen, even if she's firing blanks because she's poorly mated or run out of sperm, she's going to be laying in nice, relatively regular patches. So there's your worker on the left, and there's your drone laying queen on the right. Incidentally, having gone to Appenmondier last year, learned something very interesting that the spermathecas, this organ that queens use to store their sperm, they really do not like getting overheated. And actually, when you think of the conditions host, this is very likely to happen. And actually, this might be a reason why some of our queens are kind of dud on arrival. And incidentally, their poo is full of virus as well. But that's a discussion for another day. And there's your moonscape of drone laying worker looking across the frame. So hopefully you won't be seeing this when you open up your colonies, but some of us definitely will. This is starvation. This is heads in the bottom of cells, no food left, scrabbling around for every last drop of sustenance. Very sad to see, but it is reality of beekeeping that at times it can happen. And it can happen for perfectly, I say reasonable reasons, but isolation starvation is a thing. You can heft the hive, it can feel really heavy. That might be two frames of ivy honey on one side and the clusters on the other. Are they going to get to that in cold conditions? Possibly not if it's not a big colony. So do have a look under the crown board and just make sure they've got food. Wax moth, they killed my bees. Bloody wax moth. Well, I've got news for you, unfortunately. As nature's recycling machine, if wax moth are giving your bees a hard time, there are almost definitely underlying problems. Almost definitely. So I mentioned earlier those linear lines of bold brood as they tunnel through the wax. The bees can feel the vibrations. The nurse bees want to pull it out, dig it out, and they leave behind these lovely silken cocoons full of frass, the technical term for insect poo. They're a real annoyance. And actually, again, if they're in your colony, stop and ask yourself why you're seeing them. You might see the odd one, but if you're seeing a lot of them, is there something wrong with the queen? Is there something wrong with the workers? Or have we left the drop tray in? And under that open mesh floor, all the wax, all the pollen, all the debris collecting, and you've created a wax moth factory, and all they have to do is crawl back up into the hive. So airflow is much more useful. Get those drawers out, get them cleaned. If you're trying to store equipment, this is the other time that you're likely to encounter them. You're going to find them in your supers looking for pollen. You're going to find them in any stored brood frames. Don't store used brood frames, but if you have to, freeze them first, seal them away, be tight. The wax moth will come looking for the brood casts. You can fumigate your supers and kit using acetic acid. Do not go online onto Google and type in fumigation acetic acid and then start buying things like permethrin candles, which, by the way, are advertised for doing so. Don't do it. You do not want to be contaminating your beekeeping equipment with permethrin. That is not for human consumption. Acetic acid, it is a very nasty acid and it will diffuse away over time. It will sterilize your frames, especially in fact if you have Nosema. Again, you'd have to confirm that. Particularly for the supers, it can be useful, but at our scale, and I'm talking our as in, a handful of colonies perhaps, I really wouldn't bother. I would just make sure my supers are not full of pollen, freeze it, knock it out if you have to. 24 hours, 48 hours to kill off the wax moth. Acetic acid will also eat the metal fastenings in your frames, the metal fastenings in your supers. So just bear that in mind and stay safe if you are going to use it. Mr. Mouse in the bee house. Once again, our syllabus demands that I talk about using predator guards as a new term to me. Mouse guards, things on the entrance to stop rodents getting in. Again, they're hungry for protein. They want the pollen. They want the brood casts. As that cluster moves around the colony, moves around the hive, there might be areas that are left unguarded or unoccupied. And if there's some juicy stuff in there for a mouse to eat, he might be tempted. Generally speaking, mice are pretty well managed in healthy colonies. You can find lots of photos of mice coming to sticky ends inside of colonies. Again, if you find an excessive presence of mice in a colony, you're probably going to want to intervene. There probably is some kind of underlying issue. But generally speaking, if you've got good condition kit, bee tight, raised off the ground with a reduced entrance block. And if you want to stretch to a mouse guard, you can do. You're unlikely to ever have a problem. Generally speaking, in my experience, they tend to nibble frames at the edge, particularly drawn frames full of broodcasts, and they don't cause an excessive amount of damage. You might lose the odd frame. You might have a bit of damage perhaps, but they're not awful and they're not massively widespread. Of course, if you're keeping bees in a deepest, darkest woodland, then yeah, the woodland creatures might be more of a problem there. If you have got a small colony and there's lots of unoccupied frames, reduce the brood space down, put your dummy boards in, put insulating boards in, remove that food source, make them nice and snug, and then Mr. Mouse doesn't have a quiet corner to nest in. It's pretty straightforward. But Varroa, back to Varroa. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to say this part is quite technical. There's a lot of information here. And if you look at the syllabus, it talks about describing and being aware of. So I'm going to take that approach here. There is a lot of information on these slides. I'm going to go over it briefly. If you want to dive deep into it, we can do. But remember, my really, really nice, interesting offer you won't refuse is coming. So bear with. So, Varroa, what is treatment? How do we manage it? Well, there's lots of different ideas. We could use chemicals, oxalic acid I've mentioned. We could use comb changes. There are drop counts, Apigard, thymol, banana skins, tea leaves, rhubarb leaves, sheer hope and belief, letting the bees manage it themselves. There's lots of ideas out there. But broadly speaking, there are two main brands of treatment. You've got your acaricidal, which is using chemicals, both soft and hard. What do I mean by soft and hard? Soft chemicals don't get into the wax. So things like oxalic acid, formic acid, those chemicals are not lipid soluble. They diffuse away, they disappear. They're not left in the wax. Things like amitraz from Apivar or Apigard to some extent, both lipid soluble, they'll get into the wax, they hang around. This has an impact on what's food safe for us as humans and honey, but also potentially developing resistance, less so in the case of thymol. So you can see some pros and cons there. Generally speaking, chemicals are pretty fast and easy to use, can be effective when things aren't resistant. But there is this problem of resistance. They do cost money. There are legal elements to it that we have to observe. And like anything, there's a season for it. There's timing that we have to look at. We've got unnatural in inverted commas. Paracetamol is a medicine that's derived from willow trees. Oxalic acid comes from ants, rhubarb. So, again, it's down to you how far you want to take that. We've also got the biotechnical or husbandry-based methods on the other side. So these are manipulations of the hive, of the queen, of the bees, things that we can do as skilled beekeepers, maybe in addition to acaricidal treatments, to then bring about what is known as integrated pest management. So management doesn't mean treatment with a chemical necessarily. Management means you're doing something to look after the health of your bees. It can be labor intensive. It does require you to do a bit more thinking. Often it's iterative. You're going to need to do it a few times, maybe combined with other methods, but it's a really good way to get to know your bees. It's going to enhance your skills. It can be chemical free, which if that's important to you, fantastic. And you're not going to be developing any kind of resistance. There's a variety of options and it's safe. No chemicals, no breathing masks or goggles required. So again, just going over these briefly, there's much more detail to be known about these, but drone culling. You can put a whole frame in, let a queen draw it out, or rather let the workers draw it out for drone. If you've got drone foundation, you could use a shallow frame in a deep box and they'll put drone on the bottom of it. You can slice it off. You need to dispose of it safely, burn it, destroy it. Don't leave it lying on the floor. It's quick, it's easy. The idea being that Varroa have a preference for drone. It's got an extra 3 days in the cell. So remember, every 20 hours we've got a mature mite. So that's probably why. You can chop it off, chuck it away, get rid of it, and reduce the Varroa count. At least limit it. It's not that effective on its own. And it does have a cost for the colony. If you're constantly chopping off all this wax and drone, you need a big, healthy colony. There's some disruption to happen there. And if you forget about it, you go on holiday and you've left 2 drone frames in your colony for 3 weeks, there's going to be a lot of Varroa when you come back. So if you're going to start down this pathway, make sure you finish it. And when you're done, take it out. We can also talk about queen caging. So every 9 days, you trap a queen on one frame, you move her to another every 9 days. The idea being that the only frame with brood on it is where she is. And at day 8, it's capped. Day 9, you move her to another frame. And guess what happens to all that capped brood where all the Varroa is hiding? You get rid of it. So there's nowhere for the Varroa to hide. They're either in the caged queen frame in the cells, or they're on the backs of your bees. So if you combine this with something like oxalic acid dribble, that's very effective. The Varroa has nowhere to hide. But again, you're going to need to know how to handle your queen. You're going to need some confidence there. If you mess up and you damage the queen, that's obviously not good for the colony. And there is this seasonal requirement. You're going to want to be in full brood mode May, July, because you are in theory, putting a bit of a brake on what the queen can do in terms of laying capacity. So you need rigorous colonies. If a colony's on its last legs, don't expect something like this to make an impact because it's just not. And then as you move the queen, day 18 and so on, every 9 days thereafter, you take this frame out, you freeze it, you could puncture the cells, whatever you need to do, put it back in if you want for the bees to clean up, and your frame comes back. And then we have this lovely combination. So this is the artificial swarm. In essence, you take a colony that wants to swarm and you create an artificial swarm. So you take your queen, you put her in a box with just foundation, and you leave that box in the original location. So you've got a queen, undrawn wax, and all the flying bees flying around, going back into that original location. So that's what you can see. Hopefully you can see my mouse. That's what you can see at the top here. Queen with that light shade of orange. That's just your foundation. And then, 5 feet away, you've got all of the brood, all of the house bees, and probably one queen cell. I should hope you've got at least one queen cell in there. So what will then happen? Day 9, your queen is probably going to have some drawn frames that she's going to start laying in. The bees that have flown back home, they're going to draw frames. She's going to start laying. Your queen cell will have hatched, and probably quite a bit of the brood in there will have hatched as well. So we've got some dark orange where there's drawn frames and brood on day 9, but we've also got some space in both colonies. We go to day 21 then. So your queen that you left behind with all the flying bees, just like a swarm, they've drawn all the comb now. It's all full of brood, whilst the colony with the virgin queen, well, that's been depleted of brood. It's all hatched. So there's plenty of bees in there, and there's a virgin running around, or maybe you've caged her so that she doesn't go out and mate and she isn't running around. But regardless, there's a virgin and lots of empty frames. So at this point, you take your open brood from your original colony. That's the queen colony that you started as a swarm. You take 2 frames of brood, open brood, and you move it to the broodless virgin queen colony. So that's that first picture at day 21 with the arrow. You take the frames and you're basically baiting the Varroa. All the Varroa that's hanging around in that colony now. Remember, that's where all the nurse bees were. That's where all the hatching brood was originally. So that's where the vast majority of the Varroa is going to be. Guess where it's going to go? It's going to swarm into those 2 frames that you've moved over. And then you can take those away. After capping, you can remove those frames, freeze them, and voila, you have eradicated quite a bit of the Varroa in your colony. Now, if you want to combine this with oxalic acid, fantastic, especially since there's no capped brood, brilliant. What about a comb change? Well, you could do that. You've got freshly drawn comb. Could you actually do away with your original queen and start things off with your brand new fresh virgin queen who's going to get mated? You could do that. You could do a split. You could get a new queen in. You could recombine it. So this is a really nice method for swarm control, which, let's face it, we all need to deal with swarms, and it's a perennial problem for any beekeeper. And you can also whack a whole lot of Varroa whilst making stock increases or maintaining your numbers. Fantastic. Just be aware of absconding, and just be aware that you are going to disrupt the colony to some extent, so it needs to be rigorous. It is going to be the swarming season when you want to come and do this. So what are we trying to do with integrated pest management? Well, we're never going to eradicate Varroa. We know that it only takes one mite to start a new population. We know that. But if we can keep the level as low as possible for as long as possible, you can see from this graph, National Bee Unit graph on population curves, that the lower the starting population, the longer it takes to get to critical levels. So by doing regular management of Varroa throughout the year, throughout the season, we can keep the numbers low, keep our colonies very healthy, and the problems that Varroa causes really shouldn't rise. So here we can see, it's getting up pretty high from 400 to 1,000 by day 50. So what's that? 7 weeks. And then boom, we apply a Varroa, and then we've got different levels of killing from 99 down to 80%. And again, if you can get it down to 90, 99%, that growth curve is drastically reduced versus something where 20%, a fifth of the Varroa survive. And look at it come back. It really comes back quickly. So we've got to get it as low as possible. Integrated, both acariciidal and management, fantastic. Of course, there is the third way. And for those of us who are as sad as I am, you'll recognize that this is the Bond film Live and Let Die. This is the situation where I go to inspect a colony and the beekeeper says, "Oh, I just tend to let the bees get on with it." And that also generally means they've got the absolute worst attitude, the most stingy bees you could ever come across. But it's time effective, it's cheap, there's no chemicals, it's completely natural. And we're creating a Varroa factory, which will disperse Varroa to our neighbor colonies. And that colony will, I would imagine, within 3 or 4 seasons, left to its own devices, if not sooner, collapse. I'm not sure it's ethical and I'm not sure it's the way forwards. Whatever we do, be rigorous and have a really good rationale for it, but not being asked is not a good reason. So, enumerating. How do we enumerate our colonies, or at least the infestation within our colonies? So there's a few methods. And I'm going to teach you my favorite, which is the drop count. But just to go through them briefly, you can wash or sugar roll for mites. You take a scoop of mites, which about 200 to 300 mites, which looks like this on a frame. Thank you, Dave Cushman. Fantastic website for all sorts of knowledge. Um, and you roll them with sugar. You can roll them with ethanol, nail polish remover. The mites will fall off. You count the mites. If it's 200 bees, divide by two, and you've got a percentage. Um, Drone uncapping. You need drone for this to be possible. So generally speaking, during the spring or summer months, pink eye stage. Otherwise, they tend to fall apart. With your uncapping fork, you go through the top of the cappings. You pull out around 200 drone for a good estimate, and then again count the Varroa. You'll see them. They'll be pink, purplish, burgundy on the white abdomen of the drone. Divide by 2 or 300, whatever number you pulled out, that's your percentage infestation. And you want to get it down below 10%, ideally. 10% and below is a good place to be. So what about the drop count then? Red circle and an 8 ball. We'll come back to this. We'll come back to this. So, as I say, less than 10% infestation, and generally speaking, going through the winter, more than 10,000 bees. Otherwise, you might end up like Darren contacting me in the spring saying, "My bees snuffed it. What did I do wrong?" Well, if you didn't treat for Varroa, might be a good place to start. So when do we actually want to enumerate? What are good times of year to work out whether we need to treat or not? Well, spring, good time to do it, particularly during the build up. What has survived through the winter? What has survived our treatments from last autumn before there's honey and supers to complicate any treatments that we might put on? June gap, if you can, maybe, looking at Wimbledon time of year, Salix if it's in the spring, that's the flowering of the willow species, but the June gap can be unreliable. It's not the same in every part of the country. So you might do a late summer post crop. Again, the seasons are drifting, the crops are getting later and later, the honey crops that is, and the season lasts longer. So traditionally, maybe we would have treated in late August, early September. You might find you need to repeat or delay that treatment later, but it's crucial to get that timing right. It's no good killing Varroa in the heart of December when they've had all year snacking on your bees. And your winter bees that are coming through July, August, September, those bees need to be in tip-top condition. So by treating and killing Varroa, managing the Varroa level in that period of time when those winter bees are developing, you have a much better chance of your colony surviving through to the spring. Winter is easy. Go to sleep, no problem. Spring is hard. Build up, spring cropping to do, or spring foraging, sorry, rearing brood, drawing wax, really stressful time. That's when the compromised bees are going to fall over. And then, of course, in the winter during a brood gap. But how would you do that if you can't open your colony? Well, that's where the 8 ball comes into it. So if you remember no other numbers today, and this is a very, very simple, straightforward method. So we talked about that drop tray. You've got your open mesh floor, hopefully. Your tray goes under. If it's a really busy time of year, then you probably won't need it in there for more than 3 or 4 days. Much debris in there to count. put it in for fewer days, but you can also use a jar of nail polish remover. The wax will float, the Varroa will sink. If it's in the winter time or the colony is not very active, you need to wait more days, maybe 7 or 8 days, but you can judge this. Count all of your Varroa. Count all of the Varroa and divide by the number of the tray was under for. Ask it, am I going to treat my bees today? That's what it should say under this bat disappears. Are you going to treat your bees today? Shake the 8 ball. An 8, if you look at the graphs, it's 8 mites per day and above. That's considered a high level of infestation. So that equates to 10 and more plus percent. If it's 6 or 7, it's just the springtime. That's already pretty high. Are you going to wait all year before treating again and let it build up even more? Probably not. So it is nuanced. Use your judgment, but at or near 8, you definitely want to treat. So remember the 8 ball and ask it, are you going to treat your bees today? So we're getting there now, ladies and gents. We're going to get onto some exotic pests soon, I promise. But selecting a treatment, as the wise old beekeeper says to the aspiring novice, keep it licensed, keep it legal. So, what is legal? What is licensed? Well, within the UK, within Britain, we have licensed veterinary medicines. These have been through testing and are used in a specific formulation to treat Varroa. And we're required to record these things. So, you can see the veterinary medicine record sheet at the top there. Generally speaking, it's not just licensed substances. So, if you're putting icing sugar in for the purposes of treating Varroa, you're as veterinary medicine, even though it's a generic substance and it's not licensed, that should in theory still be recorded. If you're putting in rhubarb skins or leaves and banana skins or tea leaves, whatever it might be, if it's for the purpose of managing Varroa, guess where it needs to be recorded. But this is not an onerous thing. It is a legal requirement, but it's not an onerous thing. Just when you put it on, the batch number, how much of it, and when you took it off. You need to keep it for 5 years, but it's really, really easy to do. And I will supply this for you because the offer is coming. But generally speaking, how many licensed treatments are there at the moment? If you type in Varroa treatment online, you'll get all sorts of things, and many of them are not formulations and not substances that we'd want to be using. So just be really, really aware of that. But I ask you now, what's worse than finding out you wasted time and money and your favorite colony snuffed it in the springtime? Finding out that you were so close to getting it right, and getting it right makes a huge, huge difference. It's really, really important. So we're going to whip through this quickly. I'm just going to give you a flavor because unless you're a chemist or I don't know, you've got unlimited energy, you're going to want to come back and look at this, but I just want you to be aware there is more out there than Apigard. There are other treatments available, and they all have pros and cons. We're going to go from the least lipid soluble, so these are the softest chemicals, if you like, through to the most lipid soluble, and there's going to be 10 or 11, so it's not too bad. So we've talked about oxalic acid. It's a really, really nice, quick and easy one to use. You can use it more or less any time of year. It's best used when the hive has a brood break, when the colony has no cap brood for the Varroa to hide under, because it does not penetrate the cappings. And you can do it a dribble formulation. It's very quick and easy, 10 mils per seam. Very, very safe. You can get vaporizers. Be really careful with vaporizers because it's a nasty substance to inhale or get in your eyes. And there are other oxalic acid formulations out there. There are a few different options to have. Varamed. It's a nice dual therapy treatment. It's got oxalic acid and formic acid. So you're whacking the mites with two things. And just like the one we've just seen, it's another dribble method. You can do it in the winter, you can do it in the summer. You do want to make sure that your supers are taken off in both cases, but it's got a 0-day withdrawal. Once it's gone on, in theory, in fact, in practice, the supers can go back on. I've asked the legislators, that is the case. However, don't be fooled. The formic acid in this formulation does not permeate the capped brood. And I asked them this at Appimondia, and it does not. And I was really disappointed to hear that because I had been using it on the basis that formic acid does normally do that. So it is a dribble, phoretic mite killing substance, but it won't get into the brood cells when they're capped. Unlike formic acid in the formulation of Formic Pro. So you may have heard of Mite Away quick strips. These are patties that you put on top of the colony. They're impregnated with formic acid, which vaporizes, reaches a concentration inside of the brood boxes and kills mites. Bees can tolerate it, but they tend not to like it very much. Make sure you don't lose all of your valuable formic acid out of the bottom. In fact, the reason Max disappeared and Formic Pro reappeared is that Max had a mixed reputation and different people had different experiences, but Max was discontinued and became Formic Pro and it was reformulated. And one of the main changes, because Max was once upon a time popular for the fact you could use it supers, Formic Pro has not been certified for that. So you cannot use supers whilst Formic Pro is on, 2 strips of 7 days. But once they're off, supers can go back on. So now we go into some really interesting ones. Apilife Var, it's got 4 different compounds in it. 4 different compounds. And you get these little bricks and you break them into four and pop them in the corners. Make sure you follow the instructions. It can be really tempting to follow advice where you crush it up in a pestle and mortar and you snort it and you sprinkle it here and scrape a bit there. The cowboy secret sauce solutions are not how it was tested. It's not how it's supposed to work. So just read the instructions. But in theory, with 4 different substances, that could be quite efficacious, and you're very unlikely to see resistance. But it does want warm active periods. In fact, all of these substances that use volatile compounds, your colony wants to be active to move that compound around, and you want the fluorine because you don't want it floating away on the wind. So what about thymol then? So again, we've got Apigard, we've got Thymovar, volatile substance. You will almost have definitely come across Apigard. It is it's so ubiquitous, so ubiquitous. So you take a tin, you pull the lid back, you don't remove it because there is product on that lid. It's 1 tin for 2 weeks on top of the brood box. Switch it to another tin after 2 weeks. Keep the floor in, happy days. Thymovar, very similar, slightly different placement of those little impregnated sponges that the bees just love to eat. And you get that lovely smell of thymol coming off of your hives afterwards, which incidentally is why you don't want supers on while you're using it, because your supers are going to smell of thymol afterwards, and your honey will taste of thymol afterwards. So, move on to Apistan and Apivar and Apitraz. So these are the harder chemicals. These are generally things that have been around for a while. They were actually probably used for other kinds of therapeutic effects in the past. So, for example, Amitraz is a treatment for sheep to get rid of mites and other things. And it just so happens that when Varroa turned up in the late 80s, 90s, people thought, hey, this is great stuff and it kills mites too, and maybe it kills Varroa. And it does. They tend to be longer treatments. They tend to be strip treatments. You place them in the brood box. They're a contact treatment. So you need your bees to be brushing up against them. And they can take a long time. So you can see they're between 6 to 8 weeks, up to 10 in some cases. So read instructions, but that's a long time to not be using a super. So when might you do that? Well, a lot of bee farmers and a lot of beekeepers will be looking to use this from that late summer period where the supers are taken off and riding through into the winter with these in place before they're removed at the right time. So that's good prolonged killing. For me in Cambridge, there are an awful lot of beehives in Cambridge and around. There's a very varying amount of treatment, and so you can imagine there's a high background level of Varroa all the time. So I start with Varomed, I get instant killing and knockdown, and then I follow up with Apivar, and I get prolonged killing for 8 weeks, and that keeps the level down. That stops reinfestation into the winter when bees are less active and it's less likely to happen. So, can you identify this treatment? No, it is not a legal treatment. This is something which you can buy online. This is an oxalic acid strip, but it's not licensed. It's not legal to use. You can buy it, you can use it. You can buy it and stick it in your house. It's not illegal to do that. Just don't put it on your bees. In fact, don't go there. Just don't buy it. So what's gone wrong here? Okay, this person has removed the lid from their Apigard tray, which, that's some of the substance. But I think the elephant in the room here is that this has clearly been there for a long time. So long that the bees have built, brace comb inside of the eek that was giving the bees space to get onto it. So, do make sure you remove these things at the right time. It's really important to do that. This person has very intelligently left the lid on but has placed the tray on top of their crown board above a stack of supers. You can just see the green lip of the queen excluder there on what looks to be 2 supers as a brood space. So quite an interesting setup. That honey probably tastes of thymol now. And is it going to kill much in the brood box? I would think probably not. Nice clean supers though. And then here, what might be going wrong here? Well, actually, probably not much. But what I would be conscious of is if you're using a strip treatment that needs contact with the brood nest, particularly in the winter, will move around. The cluster will move to the food, hopefully. So if you put it in for 2 weeks, do go back and have a look and just make sure it's still in contact with the bees, because the last thing you want is the bees at one end and your strips at the other. So right at the start of this presentation, I showed you a picture of a hive that was held up with a bit of wood. This is the same hive, or in the same apiary at least. And you can just see on the doorstep, there's a strip, an Apistan strip, I think. And from this colony, this was out on the Isle of Ely, in Cambridgeshire, there were 13 strips that were being posted in the front door like a welcome mat. Not the right way to use this substance. And if you want to use it long term, we have to use it correctly. America, the last year, they've seen huge losses of bees to Varroa. Why is that? Because they're amitraz resistant. That is the sole cause. They've used the same product for too long. They haven't varied the treatments. Resistance has grown, and it's fallen off a cliff the other side. So it does have real world consequences, and it really is important to observe the instructions. So how does resistance emerge? Just briefly then. So we've got a Heinz 57 Varroa in the middle, and we've got some weirdos on the edge. And normally weirdos don't do very well. We like the Heinz 57, but then we bring in a treatment and we whack all the Heinz 57. The extra leg guys on the right, well, they're not doing too well either. But the thicker cuticle guys, some of those survive. And actually, they survive okay underneath that strip that's been left in the colony. And so they reproduce to become the new population. And the next time we try to use that acaricide, the same one that we used before, well, yeah, we're going to kill the Heinz 57, but the thicker cuticle guys in blue, they're just fine. And now we can't use that treatment anymore. And this is the case with Amitraz in the US. So this is, a real world example. Keep it licensed, keep it legal, keep it effective. So what do you want to use? There's this really nice table, really nice graph. You can see there it tells you all the licensed treatments, the active ingredients as of January 2026. This has just been updated at the end of last year, so this is accurate and current. When to apply it, how to apply it, and there's a little bit about significant features there. So that's a really, really nice table. Where can you find that table? Well, you could go online to the National Bee Unit website. You could navigate through various links, and go through resources for beekeepers. And I should say the site is a little bit cryptic. You have to know where to go, where to look. Go to leaflets, guides, and videos. I'll cut a long story short. Can I make it really easy for you to find these advisory leaflets? All of these really useful things, foulbrood disease, honeybees, all the minor conditions, how to treat it, all the Varroa. I'm short on time, so I want to push on and make this offer to you before I lose too many attendants. So please, this is my email address, jack.silberrad, and I'll let it be on the screen for a while so you can take a picture or note it down. But you can find me on the B Unit contacts page. If you fire me an email and say, I'd really like your resource pack, I'll fire you one back, and it will have links to the foulbrood diseases book. So it's got foulbrood, it's got common conditions in the back with an FAQ about managing them. I'll link you to the managing Varroa. That's got biotechnical methods. It's got the acaricidal. It's got that table I showed you. There's an image gallery so you can take a picture, go and compare it. There's fact sheets for all the pests and diseases we're going to talk about today. I'll send you a link to the record sheet so you don't even have to find that. And there'll be a link to the B Unit contacts page. So if you live out in some other part of the country, you can find out who it is you want to pick up the phone and speak to. It's totally free. Just drop me an email. I'll ping it back to you. I promise. I promise I'll do that. And share it with your friends. If they've foolishly left the presentation before seeing the special offer, then make sure they get caught up. I'm always happy to hear from beekeepers. Any bee inspector would hear that. So drop me an email, ask for the resources, say hello, and I'll ping them back to you. So, final question for you then before the exotic pest. What if Varroa mites made us itch? So this poor pupper here, he's obviously got a serious tick problem. But don't worry. Don't worry. We're going to leave him outside for 2 to 3 years in the hopes that he eventually becomes resistant to the ticks. I'm certainly not going to let that dog into my house like that. And if I was, I would treat him first. So, okay, we treat the dog. Fantastic. But what about the bees? If Varroa mites made us itch, if they could get in the bed with you, would we tolerate them? And I think sometimes there's a little bit of a separation between, us and them. And actually, I think maybe there ought not to be. So treat your bees, manage your Varroa, however you do it. A caricidal integrated pest management, biotechnical and husbandry, but do manage Varroa. It's the leading cause of colony death. So finally, then, nice fun bit. Exotic pests, notifiable pests, emerging threats to beekeeping in Britain. Aha! The mighty Asian hornets. Oh, no. Sorry, Daily Mail. That's a European hornet. That's Vespa crabra. The mighty leafcutter bee. But it does have yellow legs. It does have yellow legs. What about this? Yellow legs, a whopping great abdomen. It's a median wasp. Aha! It's massive. Look at the stinger on this bad boy. Um, Yellow legs, black body, terrifying wood wasp, very friendly. So back to the Daily Star, killer hornet invades, but of course it's Vespa japonica. That's the giant Asian hornet. That's not our yellow-legged friend, Vespa valentina nigrithorax, formerly known as the Asian hornet. We now call it the yellow-legged hornet. Interchangeable, you'll hear me say both, I'm sure. So key characteristics then, we've got the yellow band on the fourth tegument, the yellow leg, the black body, the burnt orange face. And in fact, the name Vespa valentina nigrithorax means velvety black wasp, if you wanted to know. I'm sure you've seen loads on the news, and your associations will have done a fantastic job talking to you about this, so I'm not going to over egg it, but it's a bit smaller than our native hornet, and it has this lovely hawking behavior outside of hives, sweeping left and right. Why are we worried about it? Because it eats everything, not just honeybees. It's a bit of an ecological disaster. If you're trying to make wine in France, the viticulture is suffering, the workers are getting stung, and it's mightily successful. It's doing fantastically well. And for places like France, Spain, and Portugal, it's making life really difficult for the beekeepers there as well. So I mentioned that hawking behavior. You can find this on YouTube. Hopefully, this should just play. Haha, success. A YouTube video of a YouTube video for those watching online. So you can see them hawking here. They're like a helicopter gone ship. They're actually quite clumsy hunters. They tend to grab things that are landed, and when it comes to bees, they almost wait for them to fly into them. But there they are. And eventually, the colony is reluctant to leave and forage. It gets hungrier and hungrier, and you can imagine what happens then. It starts to decline, honey yields suffer, and the colony's not having a good time if it doesn't get predated to the point of collapse. So, just a very quick comparison because you've been so good in sticking around. Um, We've got a bumblebee there on the left. This was filmed, well, over a course of years. Whilst on the right there, we've got Vespa Venetia nigrithorax just dropping there, just kissing the edge of the cup and hovering beautifully, having a think about whether she wants to stick around for a snack or carry on. Meanwhile, the European hornet is bumbling about, probably drunk on bait. So, track and trace briefly. We are still in the eradication phase. We are still destroying the nests. And our most recent innovation is the use of these Bluetooth trackers. And you can see me modeling it rather handsomely there. We use these tracker guns, and this has sped our tracking up from maybe a week at most down to sometimes within 24 hours of getting onto a report of a hornet. And we essentially follow it back to the nest and then whack it. But these things are very high up in the trees. They're very, very difficult to spot, even when they're very large. This came out of Raleigh in Essex a few years ago. And we only really knew that it was there when we were looking in the right place because of the traffic, not because we could see this giant ball in the tree. So very tricky to spot. Just a tiny bit of backstory for 2025. Then we had our earliest ever hornet queen found in a shipment of shallots in Shropshire. Overwintered probably the previous autumn and then got it. This year we had sightings in all the usual places across the south coast, some into London following transport links, and I imagine probably some well-heeled residents going to their second homes on the continent. What a lovely time. But nonetheless, be it maritime traffic, road traffic, or flying over, blowing over, the hornets are getting here. And these are the nests for 2025. So again, you can see all across the south coast there, very close to France. but then also popping up in some other places as well. That again is going to be maritime traffic. Globalism has brought hornets to interesting places, and these are all the nests, all 268 since 2016. So you can see that pattern of the coast slowly encroaching towards London has been repeated. So do you need to buy a trap? Do you need to go and spend loads of money on a hornet bucket? Probably not. But if you are going to trap for hornets, then please, please, please make it a selective trap, because what would be worse than a few hundred nests would be thousands of beekeepers catching and killing every living insect they can get their hands on. So do make sure that the traps are selective and that the bycatch can get out. If it's yellow, it's a euro. This is particularly the case when things are flying around on the wing. If it's black, it's worth a snap. Take a picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. We've had people from very, very esteemed backgrounds, professors and doctors of ethics and entomology, who are convinced they've got apes in their loft, and it's not. So take a picture, save yourself the trouble, save us the trouble. Take a picture and send it in. And how can you do that? Of course, you know this by now. Asian Hornet Watch app. It's the original. It's the one to get. It's full of other lookalike insects, so it's quite a fun resource to have on your phone. Totally free, Android and iOS. Now, Varroa. These photos are familiar, I think. We've seen these already. But what about now? Okay, well, we've got a Varroa mite on the right there. We've got a brawler that's got the legs. That's your bee louse. And then we've got these other strange too. So on the far left, we've got U Varroa. Don't worry too much. It's not a threat as of yet. It could be one day. But Tropolalaps on the bottom, or Trop for short. Absolutely, most definitely a massive, massive concern. Its natural host on the Indian subcontinent is Apis dorsata. These are the giant honeybees, and they are fantastic. They build these wonderful naked combs on branches. They migrate for months at a time without any kind of brood nest, and they bivouac in the trees. Absolutely fantastic. It's a very large bee, as you can probably imagine, and it generally tolerates the Tropolalaps mites well. However, when it's feeding on the larvae of Western honeybees, it is a very aggressive feeder. Um, and it causes an awful lot of damage. It's also fast moving. It may or may not compete with Varroa, but it can certainly coexist. And it causes serious deformities in the adult bee. So if you let the Tropolalaps feed on a larvae that's been dyed blue and then move those Tropolalaps onto a fresh larvae, their feeding sites appear as a blue dot. And you can see here it's pepper dashed. They're nibbling everywhere. And remember, their natural host, Apis dorsata, is much larger. So this is a lot more damage relative to the size of the thing that they're feeding on. Unlike Varroa, which generally establish just that one almost polite feeding site at the base of the larvae. And what does the damage look like? Well, here's the problem. It looks just like Varroa damage up until the point that the colony falls over. You can online, particularly on YouTube, you can see the tick-tocky movement of the Tropolalaps mite. It moves like clockwork across the frame. Really, really nasty pest, and it reproduces twice as quickly. It's also got a plethora of genes that allow it to detoxify or be resistant to things that we would use to kill it, the acaricides that we want to use. It already has resistance, and they can survive, well, they don't survive quite as long, but colonies that might survive for between 2 to 3 years would now be collapsing within 2 to 3 months. So instead of treating 2 or 3 times a year, we'd be treating multiple times a year, even more. So serious, serious problem. And once again, how many mites? This isn't a trop mite. This is a Varroa mite, but it's just the one, just that one egg-bearing female. How close is it? And again, this is just a brief oversight because the syllabus says just to be aware, but certainly do a deep dive. It's found in Georgia, most recently, Krasnodar in Western Russian. It's probably in Ukraine, but there's a bit of thing going on there at the moment, so they're probably not looking in their hives quite as closely. And it's almost certainly in Iran as well, although they're rather in denial about the whole thing. So with that in mind, the fact that red dwarf honeybees, which are another host of Tropolalaps, recently turned up on Malta, there is huge capacity for these things to move through Europe. And actually, going through Northern Ireland each year now, there are about 25,000 queens being imported. Very legally, very, very legally. But the majority of these queens are being reared in Eastern Europe. And where is the mite most likely to move to next? these countries in Eastern Europe. So have a think about if you are purchasing queens, can you purchase them locally? Can you rear your own queens? Can we slow this down? Because they're very small and very, very difficult to spot. And I think we've probably got less than 10 years before it gets here. If you're going to the Spring Convention on the 17th of April, I look forward to seeing you there. Guess what I'll be talking about? So finally, then the small hive beetle, Athena timida, not really a problem that we are expecting to arrive anytime soon. It is in the south of Italy, but has remained contained there. In America, where it is now very much widespread, the general consensus is that if your colony is looked after and healthy, it tends to manage the small hive beetle. And that was very much the case that I saw working in Ghana. Colonies that had been harvested almost to starvation were struggling. They were really having a hard time managing the beetle. Large, healthy colonies, you almost wouldn't see it. So, key differences then, because you may notice the beetles scurrying about, surfing over the comb, as they tend to do with their club antennae and their small black kind of scaraby body. But actually, it's the larvae that you're probably going to notice. And if we look in this middle image here, whoops. We've got at the top there a wax moth. So it's got the pairs of legs, but it's got the foot pads. That's the distinguishing feature. The small hive beetle larvae, rather than the moth larvae, no foot pads, and it has these spines on the cell. And they will tunnel through the comb. They will eat the larvae. They predate the larvae. They will eat the pollen. They will cause honey to ferment. This awful smell of stinking orange. It's a real pest for stored comb, and they can get so prolific that the comb itself will melt down under the heat with this sort of slimy, disgusting appearance. They can absolutely survive in the UK climate, put the queen out of lay, and ultimately weaker colonies will collapse. So, finally, then, because you've been so patient, we are now last at the end. One final anecdote. So somebody once said to me, upon my, working for the bee unit, that I'm only ever going to look at rubbish bees. They used a different word, but we'll use the word rubbish. And it was an exceptionally short-sighted thing for them to say. Working in the bee unit has been fantastic. I do such a variety of things, but ultimately, I'm one small part of an organization that does amazing work, and teamwork makes the dream work. The bee inspectors that I work with, they come from diverse environments and backgrounds, but professionally and academically, they do similar things to you, I would imagine. They are, in fact, just like you. And going out into the beekeeping community as I do, I see excellence wherever I go. You're enthusiastic, you're attentive, you're engaged, and here you are today. And if you're watching this recorded, thank you for sitting through. I mean, clearly you are as well. You're constantly researching, presenting new ideas and methods, kit. I turn up and I get to see if it works or not. I don't have to do any of that legwork. And there are thousands of you. Thousands of you. So, by return, I and my colleagues as bee inspectors, we hope that we can leave you with some gems as well. And just as a final note, this chap on the right, he had a real savage case of VFB. He lost a number of colonies, but we worked together. We built his beekeeping operation back up, got it healthy. And this is what he bought with his insurance money from the bee disease insurance scheme. He bought himself the boots, the wash bucket, the gloves. He's done all the things that we've been talking about today. He looks like a bee inspector. He looks like a bee inspector, and he's having a fantastic time, and he's back into it. So, under the Healthy Bees Plan, final bit of legislation or policy, I suppose, is to get everybody working together on bee health. So, thank you so much for your attention. I can take questions if you've got energy. You can send me an email. There's a bit of feedback via that QR code. I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know. And I'm sure people are going to say this was long. I did warn you, but I accept it has been long. So thank you ever so much. And thank you, Jane, and everybody at the BBK for having me along once again to speak. Have a lovely evening, and I'll take your questions if you're still here.
Thank you very much, Jack. That's great. So you can see the email address for Jack's pack, as it were. Some really interesting comments. Several, thank you, Paul, about the price of washing soda, and we really appreciate clarity, especially on things like the new advice about including bleach in our cleaning routine. Do we have any questions that people would like to ask now?
As I say, I'm more than happy to take an email because it is late, and we can even have a phone call if you want. No problem at all.
Do you want to turn off your slides, Jack, and then people will be able to see you?
I think that makes me visible. Oh,
Yes.
hang on.
Oh, there he is. Yep. Has anybody got a question?
I've got my first email. Thank you, Peter Dawson. Hot off the bat.
Uh,
Got a question from is it Agnes or Agnew?
Yeah.
yeah. Yep.
On your, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
On the number 8 of the royal drop count, that the same number if you're checking it in summer and in winter, because in winter, in theory, you should have less percentage, will be different.
Yeah. So in the winter time, you would want to be leaving it in for a more extended period of time, but you're quite right. You are going to see a lower drop, a much lower drop, to be honest, if the colony is small and inactive. And so the case with somebody recently, he was getting 4 per day, which in the winter time, that's still a lot of mites. So it is a number that you need to use a little bit of nuance for. And just kind of consider, affecting factors. It's not, it's an approximation, and any method you use will always be an approximation. So yeah, I take your point there, and yeah, in the wintertime you would want to be a bit more strict on it.
So I did a count online. I got number 4. I read in the BBK what I should be doing with treatment. I bought oxalic acid. And when we had that cold spell, I'm looking at the hive and basically thinking that I want to open that and do the oxalic treatment just because I don't know what temperatures I'm supposed to be doing, not to freeze the bees.
I have to apologize, Agna. It's difficult to make out everything that you just said. If I've understood, and tell and interrupt me if I haven't, but if I've understood, you're contemplating whether you want to open the colony up or not. It's cold, whether you want to
Yeah.
do that or not. I would say for the oxalic acid, we're talking, 20 seconds to lift a crown board and get that on. And from my experience running hundreds of colonies as a bee farmer, bees tolerate cold much, much better than they tolerate, say, humidity, damp, or Varroa. So if you have concerns about the Varroa, then crack on and do it. Wait for a nice clear day, bit of sunshine, no wind. Make it as good a day as you can if that helps. But I think the harm from lifting the crown board slightly and getting that dribble treatment on is pretty negligible.
Okay.
Thank you, Agnes. Do we have one more question? Final question before we.
Jane, there's a question from Zoo.
Oh, is there?
Do you advocate that we undertake the honeybee health assessment? And if so, how do we access that? I mean, you or Jack could answer that one.
Oh, I think that sounds like a Jane Medwell question.
Of course, we have a honeybee health assessment, which is based on National Bee Unit recommendations. And this video is a superb resource for the honeybee health assessment. And the way to access the details about it are to go to the member hub of the BBKA. And the way to enter it is to contact your association examination secretary, and they will send you a personal link. So the honeybee health assessment covers basically what Jack has talked about today. And since he's chosen all the really important things to talk about, I'm naturally advocating that it's a really important qualification. But seriously, in my area, where people have taken the honeybee health assessment, they feel that it's significantly improved their confidence in hygiene and health. And that is a superb achievement, not just for the individual beekeeper, but for the whole area. What Jack's been saying about the number of beekeepers in an area, I'm in Warwickshire and there are lots of beekeepers. And so the more people adopting best practice, the better, really.
It's never too late to brush up. Continual development, and
Yeah.
things change. Things change.
Yeah.
Trop is a brand new threat, and 20 years ago we weren't even talking about it. The first time it was mentioned was back in the 1960s as something that lived on rats. So, actually, I think newer beekeepers are often more open to new methods than somebody who might have a lot of experience and done something for many years, but it's actually lost sight of the fact that there is continual development. So your own benefit, for your own betterment in education. I would always advocate for education.
I think that's it.
Right. Thank you very much, Jack. That was absolutely fantastic. The photos alone are superb. And you've stolen my final thank you line, which is things change really quickly. And this session has brought so many things up to date. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for your patience and for sticking with me. Have a fantastic year, and if you reach out to me, I really look forward to hearing from you.
And you can see more of Jack at the Spring Convention.
See you in April, if not before. Cool. Thanks, guys. Take care. I'm going to get off now. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Oh, that was great, Jack. Thank you.
He's gone.